What if who you are isn't defined by your thoughts, your memories, or even your name, but by whatever is left when all of those things disappear? Not when you're thinking, not when you're observing, but in that strange, silent space where even awareness shuts off. This isn't about death or sleep. It's about those fleeting moments where the watcher within you goes quiet, and something still lingers, something that can't be described, but refuses to vanish. And here's the unsettling question that starts it all. If awareness stops, but something still remains, what exactly is that something? We live most of our lives assuming identity is built from our experiences, our emotions, our choices, but peel those away, layer by layer, and you're left with something harder to explain. This theory invites you to question whether your identity is not the presence that watches, but the residue that remains when there's nothing left to witness, a shadow that doesn't need the light, a role that keeps existing even when the actor has stepped off stage. And in this journey we'll walk toward that quiet edge where awareness ends and identity, somehow, still echoes. What happens in the space between thoughts? That tiny pause, that micro moment of stillness, so brief you rarely notice it. It's not sleep, and it's not concentration, it's not even silence in the usual sense. It's the absence of narrative, and in that gap, something quietly continues. Something that doesn't speak, doesn't analyze, doesn't remember, and yet, somehow, still is. We're used to thinking of ourselves as the sum of our thoughts. I think, therefore I am. But what about when you don't think? Do you cease to be? Of course not. You're still there, still breathing, still aware of your body sitting in a chair or lying in bed. But it's different. The story of you falls away. There's no one thinking about what to eat tomorrow. No one worrying about what they said earlier. The spotlight fades, and yet the stage doesn't vanish. In that quiet space, something watches without the watcher. The mind rests, and what's left isn't a self in the usual sense. It's just presence. No shape, no label, no voice. This is where the theory begins to take root. What if identity isn't the one creating thoughts, but the one revealed when thought stops altogether? Consider this. A thought is like a ripple on water. When the mind is agitated, ripples form. They call themselves me. I am worried. I am hopeful. I am confused. But what about the water underneath? When the ripples still, the surface clears, and now you can see the sky, the trees, the sun reflecting back. The water was always there. It didn't disappear when the ripples stopped. It just became quiet, transparent, still. This stillness is not unconsciousness. It's not blankness. It's not meditation in the strictest sense. It's subtler than that. It's the moment between moments. The inhale before the next thought arrives. You don't need to force it. In fact, the more you try to reach it, the more it slips away, because this isn't something you do. It's something you notice once you stop trying to be someone. For a few seconds, maybe even just a heartbeat, you're no longer thinking about your identity. You're not reflecting on your past or projecting into the future. You're not trying to be kind or intelligent or even human. You're just there, and in that there-ness, a strange peace appears. No drama, no effort, no personality, but also no confusion. It's clear, like untouched snow, not labeled, not interpreted, just pure being. Now here's where it gets even more unusual. If you watch closely, you'll notice that thoughts are what constantly tell you who you are. I'm tired, I'm upset, I'm the kind of person who. They narrate your life endlessly, convincing you that you're the voice doing the speaking. But the voice changes, it contradicts itself, it argues with itself. Sometimes it speaks in words you don't even agree with, and yet, there's always something beneath it. Noticing that something doesn't change. It doesn't argue, it just remains. So what is that silent witness? Is it identity? Is it soul? Or is it just the absence of performance? The theory suggests something deeper. When all mental activity fades, when you're not even aware that you're aware, what's left is the raw material of identity. Not a person, not a story, but a trace, a shape burned into reality without needing awareness to hold it. Imagine your thoughts as a flashlight, scanning a dark room. Wherever the beam goes, you see furniture, walls, objects. You call those things your traits, your desires, your fears. But what about the floor the flashlight is standing on, the ground it rests on, that never gets scanned, never gets named? But without it, the flashlight has nowhere to shine. That ground is what remains when awareness shuts off. not illuminated, not described, but real. There are moments, rare, fragile, when this trace of identity becomes noticeable, during deep meditation, in trauma, recovery, in moments of extreme grief or surrender. You feel like the you who used to think and perform and explain everything has left the building, and yet, something continues. You're not gone, you're just not narrating, and it doesn't feel like emptiness, it feels like release. Now ask yourself this. If this silent, thoughtless presence remains when all else falls away, isn't that closer to who you really are? Not the performer, not the character, but the stage on which the whole act unfolds. And if that's true, if identity is the residue that doesn't need awareness, doesn't even need recognition, then what does that make all your daily self-descriptions? Just ripples, just echoes. This doesn't mean you should never think, or never feel, or never form a sense of self. It means that the truest self might be the one that doesn't try to exist at all, the one that's simply still there when all the trying stops. You don't need to chase this silence. You don't need to become anything. You only need to notice when thoughts go silent. Something remains. That something doesn't ask for attention, doesn't need to be believed, and doesn't care if it's forgotten, because it's not built on awareness. It's what's left behind when awareness goes dark. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the only part of you that was ever truly real. You walk into a room and instantly adjust. Your posture straightens, your voice shifts, your words become careful. Maybe it's a formal setting, or maybe you're just with someone who makes you feel the need to be on. But notice something strange. Without thinking, you've put on a version of yourself, not a fake one, just one tailored for this exact moment. And once again, the you that entered has stepped aside, and a new shadow has taken its place. This shadow, this projection of self, is subtle. It doesn't lie, it doesn't pretend, but it performs. It watches the watcher, it becomes what's needed, and over time, it becomes so automatic that we mistake it for who we are. Now pause and rewind. Think of yourself sitting quietly, alone, no eyes on you, no one listening, no need to explain, impress, or even speak. Do you act the same? Do you feel the same? Or does that automatic performance soften into something quieter, something less defined? This is where the theory begins to slip deeper into the cracks. What if identity is not what we think it is, but a shadow cast by our need to be witnessed? A shadow cannot exist without light. In the same way, a constructed identity, our self-image, cannot exist without the beam of awareness shining upon it. We're constantly performing to our own attention. I'm this kind of person. I don't do that. I would never. These sentences aren't random. They're rehearsed. They're loops, and we say them to ourselves as much as we say them to others. This isn't deceitful. It's adaptive. It's how consciousness maintains a thread, a storyline to follow. But here's the paradox. The more we believe in the shadow, the more we forget the body casting it. We start to confuse the echo for the voice, the reflection for the face, the persona for the presence. Let's say you're feeling anxious. The thoughts spiral. I always do this. I can't handle situations like this. Why am I like this? Each sentence reinforces a version of self. A shadow becomes thicker. It darkens. And yet, behind the panic, beneath the noise, you'll always find a quiet witness, watching, untouched. The anxiety doesn't replace you. It covers you. What's astonishing is that the mind rarely notices this shift. We don't see the mask because we wear it from the inside. The shadow behind self blends so perfectly with the light of attention that we stop asking, who is the one casting the shadow at all? This is where silence becomes a mirror. In moments of non-doing, when you're neither talking, nor scrolling, nor trying to be anyone, you may catch a glimpse of this strange emptiness. Not an emptiness of despair, but of possibility. An identity that isn't constructed, because there's no audience, no performance, no spotlight, just the stage itself. And here comes the core of the theory. Identity isn't just who you think you are. It's what gets built in the gaps where awareness meets expectation, a shape formed by reflections, not essence. And when awareness stops, the reflections disappear, but the shape remains, like smoke after a candle's blown out. Faint, residual, still present. The shadow behind self is not inherently negative. It isn't a lie, it's a habit, a survival strategy. It allows us to navigate relationships, responsibilities, even introspection, but it is not you. And when awareness fades, when no one, not even you, is watching, the shadow fades too. What's left is the part that never needed a name, never needed to be observed to exist. This is why certain states of consciousness, like deep meditation, sensory deprivation, or grief, feel so destabilizing. The usual mirrors are gone, the spotlight has dimmed, and the shadows vanish. You're left with something raw, formless. Still, a kind of identity that isn't made, but simply remains. We often think self-discovery is about uncovering truths, rewriting narratives, understanding trauma, and yes, that work matters. But beneath all of it, beneath the healing, the insight, the reframing, there is a presence that never spoke, never broke, and never asked to be seen. It just was, and still is. You might ask, if I'm not my thoughts, not my roles, not my stories, then who am I? That question is the doorway. But the answer doesn't come in language. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes in a pause, a breath, a brief, flickering absence of needing to know anything. And in that absence, the identity that remains is not the one you created, but the one you've forgotten to perform. So next time, you notice yourself adjusting, performing, explaining, pause, not to stop yourself, but just to notice the motion, to observe the shadow forming, and then let it pass. Wait until there's nothing left to reflect, until the witness stops witnessing, and see what, if anything, remains. What you find there might not look like you. It might not speak. It might not even think, but it will feel, still, familiar, ancient, not the echo, not the voice, but the space that holds both. And maybe, just maybe, that quiet shape is the real you, the only part that never needed to be seen to exist. Close your eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to retreat. Let the noise of the world blur into the background. Let go of your need to watch your thoughts. Let even the act of noticing slip through your fingers. And if you stay there long enough, without naming, judging, or even remembering, you might stumble into a strange silence, one where awareness, that ever-present internal camera, simply dissolves. And yet, something remains. Most theories of the self begin with awareness. To be conscious is to be alive. To be aware is to be someone. But what if awareness is just the lens? What if it's not the self at all, but the spotlight that helps the self be seen? And if that spotlight fades, if awareness dissolves completely, would you still be there? Would anything? It's easy to assume that when awareness goes, experience ends. But that's not always true. Some of the most mysterious experiences humans have ever reported, from deep meditation to near-death states to psychedelic loss of ego, suggest the opposite. When the conscious mind disappears, a deeper layer often emerges, not with clarity or insight, but with absence, and in that absence something strange and foundational lingers. You can't witness it directly, because the witness is gone. But you can remember it after, like waking from a dream you didn't know you were in. You weren't thinking, you weren't watching, you weren't even there, and yet, there was a sense of being, a hum of existence without form, a kind of being, without the burden of becoming. This is the strange place where identity no longer needs a name, where memory has nothing to hold on to, where your usual boundaries, mind, body, self, past, dissolve into something so still, it doesn't even call itself peace. Not because it's lacking emotion, but because it's beyond the structure that emotions arise from. Awareness, it turns out, is a two-edged sword. It gives you the power to witness, but it also gives rise to division. You can observe yourself, but only because you've created something to be observed, a thinker and a thought, a subject and an object. Awareness allows for duality. It lets you split yourself in two. But beneath that split, beneath the mirror and the reflection, there is something untouched, something that doesn't observe but simply is. And this is what begins to emerge when awareness dissolves. Not a higher form of watching, but the absence of watching altogether. A state not of attention but of disappearance. To most people, this sounds terrifying. We cling to awareness because it feels like the last rope holding us above the void. Lose that, and surely we fall into nothingness. But here's the twist: in the rare moments when awareness does dissolve, people often report not fear, but freedom. Not loss, but lightness. As if the rope itself was the weight all along. We think of awareness as the bedrock of identity, but what if it's just the mechanism of narration? What if it's how the mind stays busy by constantly watching, describing, categorizing, and when that watching ceases, the mind stops spinning. The narrator puts down the pen, the story closes, but the page, it's still there, and on it, faint but indelible, is the imprint of being. This theory doesn't suggest that you should try to dissolve awareness. That's still effort, still ego, still a trick of the watcher trying to watch itself vanish. Instead it asks, when the show ends, when the lights dim, when the spotlight fades, what remains on the stage? And the answer might be identity that doesn't require attention to exist. A self that was never dependent on being perceived, even by yourself. This isn't the same as unconsciousness. In fact, it's something stranger, post-consciousness, not asleep, not alert, but present in the absence of presence. You might call it source, you might call it void, you might call it nothing, but nothing isn't empty. It's just free of form, free of concepts, free of the desperate need to keep existing in someone else's eyes, including your own. This is why people who've touched these spaces often return with a kind of quiet detachment, not because they've lost themselves, but because they've seen what remains when the self is no longer needed. They've met the version of identity that floats beneath awareness like the ocean floor, unshaken by the waves above. In your daily life, you can feel glimpses of this when you stop trying to hold yourself together, when you stop narrating your experience, when, even briefly, you forget who you're supposed to be. In those moments, identity doesn't vanish, it simplifies, it becomes unburdened, and what remains isn't an idea, it's a presence, a flavor of being that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't require applause, that simply. So the next time you feel the weight of self-consciousness, the grip of constant awareness, see if you can let go of the need to witness, let awareness dissolve, just for a breath. Don't try to replace it with a better version, just fall through the gap, and see what's still there when no one is looking, even you. Because in that stillness, you may discover the part of you that never needed to be noticed in the first place. Imagine stepping off a stage after a long performance. The lights dim, the applause fades. The costume itches against your skin. You walk into the dressing room, peel off the makeup, remove the wig, unbutton the character you just spent hours becoming. And yet something still clings to you. Not the role you played, but the subtle residue of pretending, a kind of echo that doesn't vanish with the curtain, a mask that, somehow, remains. This is how most of us live, wearing layers of identity so convincingly that we forget they're not part of our skin. We become the student, the parent, the friend, the thinker, the spiritual seeker, not out of deceit, but necessity. Life asks us to perform, and so we do. The problem isn't the mask, it's that we've worn it so long, we've forgotten we ever had a face underneath. Every time you speak, move, or think, you reinforce an image of who you are. I'm like this. I don't do that. I always respond this way. These sentences stitch together the fabric of identity, but they also harden it. They create boundaries so strong, we mistake them for the shape of the soul, and once those boundaries form, they don't loosen easily. Even when awareness fades, the imprint of the mask remains. But what is the mask, exactly? It's not just personality. It's not behavior either. The mask is the result of long-term self-reference, of thinking about yourself in loops again and again, until the loop becomes law. It's the habit of being seen, even when no one is watching. It's the internalized mirror, the voice in your head, rehearsing conversations you'll never have, the way you sit a little straighter when you're alone, just in case you're being observed by yourself. This mask is clever. It adapts. It wears sincerity like a second layer. It even pretends to search for truth. But every time it does, it asks, how does this reflect on me? Even when it meditates, it's hoping to become more peaceful, more enlightened, more you. It's the seeker and the sought, the teacher and the student, both locked in performance. Here's the unsettling part. When awareness shuts off, when the watcher stops watching, the mask doesn't immediately vanish. It lingers, like perfume in a room long after the guest has left, like grooves in stone from water long gone. It continues moving through you, even in absence, because it was never just a performance. It was a residue, a behavioral echo that doesn't need thought to keep ringing. And this brings us to a quiet realization. Identity, in its most persistent form, is the mask that survives even after attention dissolves. It's not alive, but it has inertia. It moves through habit, not presence, through repetition, not reality. Think of an old record player. When the music stops, the needle keeps spinning. No sound, no direction, but movement remains. That's the mask, the ghost of self continuing through momentum, even when the spotlight fades. This is why certain emotions feel so heavy, not because they're happening in the moment, but because they come attached to identity. You don't just feel sadness, you feel your sadness. You don't just feel anger, you feel like someone who gets angry. The emotion is temporary, the mask it reinforces is not. And the danger here is subtle. We begin to maintain the mask out of fear that without it we'll disappear, that if we stop thinking of ourselves a certain way, we'll become nothing. But what if that nothing isn't a void, but a doorway, a space where the burden of performing lifts, and something truer gets to breathe? You don't need to destroy the mask, that's just another role. The one who sees through roles. You don't need to escape it, transcend it, or judge it. You only need to see that it's not you. It's a shape you wear, a shape that survives attention, but only as long as you feed it. And how do you stop feeding it? You stop referring to it. Not in some grand gesture, not by burning old journals or changing your name, but in the small, quiet act of noticing when you're acting, when you're narrating, when you're about to post something, say something, prove something, not because it's true but because it reinforces who you believe you are. Let those moments pass. Don't fight them, just don't cling to them, and eventually the mask begins to fall away, not through effort, but through lack of interest, through no longer needing to be anyone. And when the mask softens, what remains? You might expect emptiness, a void, but what arises instead is presence, not a performance, not a personality, just presence, undefended, uninterested in being observed. It doesn't call itself authentic, because it doesn't call itself anything, it just is, like still air, like quiet before dawn. So here is the paradox. The more you try to become yourself, the more you're reinforcing the mask. But when you stop trying, even to be real, you return to something older than identity, something that doesn't need thought, attention, or approval to exist. And that something has no face, no voice, no past. But it sits been here all along, just waiting for the mask to fall. Most of us carry a subtle belief that we are the observer behind it all, the one watching the thoughts, hearing the internal monologue, steering the ship of consciousness. But if you look closely, you'll see a strange truth. The listener is made of the same stuff as the voice. The self that observes is built from the very echoes it watches. A loop, a hall of mirrors. Now imagine your mind as that room. Throughout the day it fills with noise, thoughts, reactions, inner dialogues. But when all that subsides, when even awareness quiets down, something remains. Not sound, not memory. Just a faint imprint of what was once experienced. A presence without narration. And in that presence we come face to face with a haunting question. If identity is an echo, who was the one listening in the first place? Walk into an empty room where someone once laughed. The sound is gone, but something lingers. It's not the laugh itself, it's the shape it left in the silence. A warmth, a trace, an echo without a listener. You might expect silence, but instead you encounter the aftermath of identity, not active thoughts, but impressions, residual patterns, habits without awareness. It's the way your shoulders tense, even when you're not stressed. The way your breath shortens when nothing is wrong. These are the body's echoes of a self that once performed, and still performs, even when no one's watching. And when that loop pauses, when both voice and listener dissolve, what remains? This is what makes the residue of identity so elusive. It's not thought, it's not memory, it's pattern, momentum. Like footsteps worn into a forest trail. No one's walking anymore, but the path remains. And this brings us to a deeper point in the theory. When awareness stops, identity doesn't vanish. It continues as inertia, as echo, a self without a self behind it. And here's the unsettling part. This echo can act. It can behave. It can even make choices. Not because anyone is behind the wheel, but because the patterns are strong enough to move on their own, like a wind-up toy still marching long after you've stopped paying attention. You might think of it like this. Imagine a bell that's been struck. The sound reverberates long after the strike. If you listen to the tone, it feels alive, vibrating, singing. But eventually, the sound fades, and the air still carries the shape of what used to be there. It's no longer an event. It's a memory etched into vibration. That's what identity becomes in the absence of awareness. Now imagine moments when you catch this happening, when you realize you're scrolling through something you don't care about, arguing about something that doesn't matter, reacting to a comment with a version of you that isn't even awake. Those are glimpses of the echo at work, identity performing without anyone in the audience. You get up, you brush your teeth, you reach for your phone, you open your favorite app. None of it feels intentional, but it all happens. Not because you chose it, but because the echo of you did. A version of you built from repetition, memory, and cultural instruction. An unconscious character moving through a half-lit dream. So what does it mean to live like this? Is it bad? Is it dangerous? And most people never do, because the echo sounds familiar. It sounds like you, but only because you've heard it for so long. Not necessarily. Echoes aren't enemies. They're the mind's way of being efficient. They allow you to move through the world without thinking about every step. But the danger lies in mistaking the echo for the source, in believing the momentum of past reactions is who you are now, in never noticing the difference between presence and repetition. So how do you step out of it? Not by force, not by thinking harder or observing more sharply, but by noticing the spaces where the echo fades and refusing to fill them. When you feel the urge to say something just to keep the self alive, don't. When you reach for a reaction just because it's what you always do, pause. Let the space stretch a little longer than is comfortable. Let the silence ring. And in that space, you'll start to feel the difference between action and momentum, between response and residue, between identity that's alive and identity that's just leftover sound. And in that silence, identity is no longer something you have to protect, or define, or prove. It's just one possible shape in a vast field of quiet. What happens next may surprise you. Without the echo, things don't stop. You don't become passive. You don't fade into nothingness. Instead, something subtler takes shape. Action without identity. Movement without self-reference. A flow that doesn't need a name. This is where real freedom begins. Not in erasing identity, but in no longer being ruled by its echoes. You can still play the role, still wear the name, but you're not bound to the patterns anymore. You're not pretending to be the echo. You're simply present, awake in the silence that remains when the performance ends. And the listener, the one you thought was behind it all? Maybe that was an echo too. There is a peculiar sensation that surfaces when everything else falls away, when the noise of thought subsides, the mirrors of self-perception shatter, and even awareness begins to dim. It's not emptiness, not quite. It's more like a stillness that's been there all along, patient and untouched, waiting beneath every layer of your life. It doesn't shout to be noticed. It doesn't need to. It just waits for the noise to quiet enough for you to finally sense it. This is the identity that isn't constructed, narrated, or performed. It doesn't belong to your memories, your beliefs, or your achievements. It doesn't come and go with mood swings or social roles. It's older than the first thought you ever had, and quieter than any word you've ever spoken. It's the part of you that doesn't participate in the performance, but endures it, watches it, survives it. Think of it like the sky. Storms of thought roll across it. Clouds of self-image gather and disperse. The sun of awareness rises and sets. And yet, the sky itself, vast, indifferent, waiting, is unchanged. It doesn't react to the weather. It doesn't care what passes through. It simply remains. This layer of identity doesn't need awareness to exist. It's not dependent on being seen, even by you. And in many ways, it's the truest part of you precisely because it's not trying to be anything. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't improve. It doesn't care if you think of it as you or not. It's just there, still, patient, unshaken. The reason most people never encounter this deeper layer is simple. They're too busy constructing and maintaining the more visible versions of self. The thinker, the doer, the believer, the achiever. All these selves are loud. They demand recognition, validation, and continuation. They constantly narrate and reinforce their own existence. And in doing so, they drown out the silent identity beneath them, the one that isn't trying to prove anything at all. But here's the paradox. Even when you're not aware of it, that waiting identity is still influencing you. It's the source of that strange familiarity you feel when you stare into the mirror and see a face that's aged, yet still feels like you. It's the reason you sense continuity between your 5-year-old self and the person reading this now. Despite the fact that everything, your thoughts, body, personality, and memories has changed 1,000 times over. It's also the reason certain moments feel sacred without explanation. Standing at the edge of the ocean, watching snow fall in silence, holding the gaze of someone you love. These moments bypass the surface-level narrative. They speak directly to the self beneath stories. They resonate with the part of you that doesn't need words to understand. Some philosophers have called this the substratum of identity. Others call it the ground of being. Spiritual traditions have given it names too: the soul, the witness, the Atman. But all these terms are just fingers pointing at the same quiet truth. There is a self that isn't dependent on your participation to exist, and it waits patiently for you to remember it. The challenge is that we often confuse waiting with absent. If something isn't active, we assume it's not there. But that's not how this deeper self operates. It's not absent. It's simply not assertive. It doesn't impose itself on your consciousness. It lets you run the performance. It lets you forget. It lets you build identities and tear them down. And when you're exhausted from all the constructing, it's still there, unchanged, waiting. This raises a profound question. If this quiet, enduring self is always present, is it more you than the parts that constantly change? If everything you identify with, your job, your relationships, your beliefs, can vanish overnight, but something still remains, shouldn't that be the foundation of who you are? There's a reason this question feels unsettling. It's because this deeper identity doesn't give you anything to hold on to. It offers no story, no status, no self-image. It's not successful or unsuccessful. It's not happy or sad. It just is. And in a world obsessed with doing and becoming, just being can feel like nothing at all. But in that nothingness lies the most stable truth you'll ever find. You don't have to seek this identity. Seeking implies it's missing. It's not. It's underneath every experience you've ever had. All you have to do is stop crowding it out. Stop trying to define yourself. Stop narrating every thought. Stop performing for the invisible audience in your mind. And in that pause, if you're patient, you'll sense the quiet pulse that's been there all along. And when you do, you'll realize something subtle but life-changing. You were never becoming anything. You were always this. All the changes, the growth, the losses, the reinventions, they were just weather patterns across the sky. The real you, it never moved. It never needed to. It just waited. And it's still waiting now for the noise to fade, for the masks to slip, for the echoes to die down. It's waiting for the day you stop searching for yourself and realize you were never missing. What happens after the I disappears? It's not a question most people ever stop to consider, because the I feels like the fundamental structure of reality itself. Every thought, every choice, every sentence you speak seems to orbit around it. I want, I think, I feel. Without that small, simple word, our lives appear to lose all coherence. And yet, if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. The I isn't a constant. It comes and goes. It flickers, and in its absence, life continues. We like to imagine that the I is the author of experience, writing each line of our existence into being. But what if it's just a character in the story, one that appears halfway through the book and insists it's been there all along? Watch your thoughts for a while, and you'll see how slippery this I really is. It takes credit for actions it never decided, explains feelings it never created, and narrates events that were already happening before it arrived. It's less like a driver at the wheel, and more like a commentator, narrating a race that's already in motion. If you want proof, consider this: your heart beats without your permission. Your lungs breathe without being told. You don't consciously direct the billions of neural firings that keep you alive each second. The vast majority of you exists and functions without any involvement from the I. Even thoughts, the very material from which the I seems woven, arise spontaneously. They appear in your awareness uninvited, and yet the I always shows up after the fact, proudly stamping its name on them. This is the great illusion of selfhood, the belief that the I is the source, when in truth it is the afterthought. And if that's true, then what happens when the illusion collapses, when the I finally ends? The first thing you notice is that nothing dramatic occurs. The world doesn't vanish. Your body doesn't dissolve. Life doesn't grind to a halt. The sun still rises. Birds still sing. The wind still moves across your skin. All of it continues, exactly as it always did. The difference is that it's no longer happening to someone. It's just happening. This is where language begins to fail, because everything we say is structured around the I. I am walking. I am seeing. I am thinking. But when the I is absent, the sentence collapses into something simpler: walking, seeing, thinking. Experience unfolds without ownership. There is no one claiming it, and paradoxically, this makes it more intimate, not less. It's no longer filtered through the need to belong to a self. It simply is. It's a subtle but profound shift, like stepping out of a costume you didn't know you were wearing. For the first time, there's no effort required to maintain the illusion, no energy wasted defending a self-image, narrating a story, or protecting an identity. The machinery of the eye powers down, and in the silence that follows, reality becomes startlingly direct. Many traditions have described this state in different ways. Buddhists call it anatta, the doctrine of no self. Some mystics refer to it as union, others as pure being, but they all point to the same thing: when the eye ends, life doesn't stop. It becomes more honest. There is no observer and observed, no thinker and thought, no doer and deed. There is only the unfolding of experience, fluid, immediate, whole. At first, this can feel disorienting. The ego fights for survival, clinging desperately to its role as the central character. It whispers fears into your ear. If there's no I, what's the point of anything? Who will make decisions? Who will care about the people you love? But look deeper, and you'll see those questions don't need an I to be answered. Choices still happen. Compassion still arises. In fact, they become purer, because they're no longer tangled in the self's endless need for validation. Imagine the difference between dancing and being the dancer. The first is effortless movement, spontaneous and free. The second is self-conscious, worried about how it looks, concerned with being seen. The I turns life into a performance. Its absence turns life back into a flow. This doesn't mean the I is evil or useless. It's a useful fiction, a tool for navigating the practical realities of the human world. But it's only a mask, and like all masks, it can be set down, and when you do, you find that what's beneath it isn't a void, it's presence, immediate, unfiltered, and whole. There's a reason people who experience the fading of the I often describe it as coming home. It's not a dramatic enlightenment or a cosmic revelation. It's something much simpler, the quiet realization that you were never who you thought you were. You were never the voice narrating the story. You were the space in which the story unfolded. And when the I ends, that space doesn't collapse. It expands. It reveals itself as the only constant, always here, always untouched, always waiting behind the noise of identity. The character disappears, but the stage remains. And in that stage, life continues to dance, just as it always has, long before you ever thought you were the dancer. There's a voice in your head, and it never seems to shut up. It narrates, analyzes, criticizes, plans, and replays. It comments on your actions as you perform them, and preemptively explains what you might do next. It's the same voice that tells you who you are and who you're not, that builds elaborate stories about the past and the future, and that insists loudly that it's you. But here's the unsettling truth. That voice isn't you. It isn't even yours. It's simply there, speaking into the void, often without your permission, often without purpose. If you sit still long enough and pay attention, you'll notice something remarkable. The voice never asks your consent before it speaks. It just starts talking. You don't decide its topics. You don't compose its sentences. In fact, many of its thoughts contradict what you actually believe. One moment, it's encouraging. The next, it's cruel. One day, it's optimistic. The next, it's catastrophizing. And yet, despite all this unpredictability, you still believe it's you. Why? Because the voice uses the language of identity. It speaks in first person. I'm not good enough. I hope they like me. I'll never succeed. And because these thoughts feel internal, because they arise within the space of your own mind, you assume they must be coming from the real you. But if that were true, why do they surprise you? Why do they sometimes horrify you? Why do they say things you'd never consciously choose to think? The voice isn't your essence. It's a process, an emergent byproduct of memory, conditioning, and language. It's the echo of 1,000 conversations you've heard, stories you've internalized, expectations you've absorbed. It's a narrator without an author, a radio that keeps broadcasting even when no one's listening. And if you observe carefully, you'll realize that you are not the one speaking, you are the one hearing. But even that distinction goes deeper than it seems. Because if the voice is not you, then who or what is the listener? And if the listener is also not stable, if even awareness itself can dissolve, then what remains when the voice has no audience? Here's where things become subtle. Even when you stop paying attention to it, the voice keeps speaking. It doesn't need a listener. It doesn't require approval. It runs on autopilot. You might be fully absorbed in a task, completely unaware of your thoughts, and still, beneath the surface, that narration hums away like background machinery. Its persistence is not proof of its truth, it's proof of its mechanical nature. In many ways, the voice is like a dream you're having while awake. It borrows fragments of memory, snatches of language, pieces of emotion, and stitches them together into a continuous monologue. But just as a dream can feel vivid and personal while being entirely constructed, so too can the voice feel like you while being nothing more than neural noise. This is why in moments of deep stillness, during meditation, intense focus, or states of flow, the voice often fades into the background. It's not that you disappear, it's that the illusion of a constant commentator dissolves, and with it, the false sense of identity it sustains. What's left behind is not silence, exactly, but a deeper kind of awareness, one that doesn't need narration to know it exists. The voice tries to convince you that it's indispensable. It warns that without its chatter, you'd stop functioning, you'd forget who you are, you'd make bad decisions, but reality contradicts that fear. In your most profound moments, falling in love, witnessing a breathtaking landscape, losing yourself in music, the voice disappears completely, and yet, in those moments, you don't feel less like yourself, you feel more like yourself, more present, more alive. So if the voice isn't you, and if its absence makes you feel more real, then what purpose does it serve? It's a survival mechanism, a story-weaving tool that helps the mind predict, prepare, and control. It has utility, yes, but it's not your identity. It's a tool pretending to be the user, a servant wearing the crown of the king. And here's the deeper paradox. The voice can even narrate its own unreality. It can say, "I know I'm not real." It can talk about its own disappearance. And still, you might believe it, because language is persuasive. It feels authoritative, especially when it arises from within. But authority is not authenticity. Just because the voice sounds like you doesn't mean it is you. The next time the voice speaks, don't rush to agree. Don't rush to argue either. Simply notice it. Watch how it forms sentences without your permission. Watch how it contradicts itself, changes direction, clings to old stories. Then ask yourself, who is watching? Who is noticing this stream of thought come and go? And what happens to that watcher when the stream stops? The truth is disarmingly simple. The voice is not essential to who you are. It is not the source of identity. It's just noise, a story engine that can't help but narrate. And when you finally stop identifying with it, something astonishing happens. The world grows quieter. The self grows lighter. The boundary between you and everything else begins to soften. And what remains is not a voice, not a thinker, not even a listener, but a stillness, so vast and effortless, it doesn't need words to know itself. The voice will keep speaking, of course. That's what it does. But now you know, it isn't you, and it never was. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine a world where nothing is being observed. No one is watching the sunrise. No one is naming the colors in the sky. No one is forming opinions about whether the air feels cool or warm. The scene unfolds anyway. Clouds drift. Light bends. Time passes. Now imagine that same absence happening inside you. No one watching thoughts. No one analyzing feelings. No one narrating experience. And yet, somehow experience continues. This is the strange territory of the self without witnessing. We tend to equate being with being aware. If you're not observing your thoughts, you must be unconscious. If you're not reflecting on yourself, you must not exist. But this assumption collapses under closer inspection. There are countless moments in your life when witnessing fades, and yet the self remains. Think of times you've driven a familiar route and arrived without recalling the details. Or moments when you were so absorbed in a task that you forgot yourself entirely, and yet something was still acting, deciding, responding. The self didn't vanish. It just stopped watching itself. This brings us to a paradox that lies at the heart of identity. Perhaps the witnessing self, the one that observes and narrates, is not the essence of who you are. Perhaps it's just a function layered on top, a spotlight that illuminates what's happening but isn't necessary for the happening itself. If that's true, then the deepest part of you might exist entirely without the need for observation. The idea unsettles us, because it challenges the illusion of control. We like to believe that without the internal watcher, life would fall apart. But life doesn't rely on witnessing. Your body continues its work without your supervision. Healing wounds, digesting food, regulating heartbeat. Your thoughts emerge before you decide to think them. Even your choices often appear before you're aware of making them. The witnessing mind isn't the conductor of the orchestra. It's the audience, applauding and booing after the music has already begun. This realization becomes even more profound when you look at states of consciousness where witnessing disappears entirely. Deep sleep, for instance. In that state, there's no inner narrator, no observer cataloging sensations, and yet, you still are. You still wake up in the same body. You still feel a sense of continuity. The self persists without the need to watch itself. In certain meditative traditions, practitioners describe moments of non-dual awareness. But the phrase is misleading. In these states, even awareness as we understand it, subject observing object, dissolves. There's no I seeing anything. There's no I at all. And yet, something remains, a presence that's not watching but being. It's not passive or unconscious. It's simply beyond the split between observer and observed. You've touched this state before, even if you didn't have words for it. Think about those fleeting instants when you're so immersed in music that there's no listener and no sound, just the experience of music itself. Or when you lose yourself in the rhythm of running, painting or dancing, where action happens without a doer. In those moments, witnessing takes a back seat, but being does not. And here lies a radical insight. Identity does not require witnessing to exist. Witnessing is a layer, a lens, a function, but not the foundation. The foundation is deeper. It is the raw presence that continues when no one is naming, watching, or analyzing it. This perspective also changes how we understand suffering. Much of our mental pain isn't caused by what happens. It's caused by witnessing what happens, and then building stories around it. I shouldn't feel this way. Why did this happen to me? What does this say about who I am? Without the witness's commentary, much of that suffering loses its fuel. Pain might still exist, but it's no longer wrapped in identity. It's just sensation, passing through. This doesn't mean we should try to eliminate witnessing. That's neither possible nor necessary. Witnessing is part of the human experience, a useful tool for reflection and growth, but it's not the essence of self, and knowing that gives you a strange kind of freedom, because if your identity isn't tied to the observer, then you're not limited by what the observer sees. You're not confined by its judgments, its labels, its endless commentary. There's a quiet liberation in realizing that the deepest self doesn't need to be seen, not even by itself. It doesn't crave recognition. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't ask to be named. It simply exists, silently, whether or not anyone, including you, is watching. This is why, in moments of profound stillness, people often describe feeling vast, boundaryless and timeless. It's not because they've expanded into something new. It's because they've slipped beneath the layer of witnessing into the self that was always there, quietly being without needing to know that it is. And here's the final twist. Once you realize that this self exists independently of observation, you start to see the witnessing mind for what it truly is, a surface phenomenon. Useful, yes, but not necessary. Precious, perhaps, but not essential. And with that realization, the compulsion to constantly monitor, label, and define yourself begins to loosen its grip. In the end, the self without witnessing is not a void. It's the foundation beneath all experience. It's the part of you that doesn't need eyes to see, doesn't need thoughts to think, doesn't need stories to be real. It's what remains when the narrator falls silent, when the watcher steps away, when the mirror is covered. And though it is silent, it is more deeply you than anything you could ever observe. Who would you be without your memories? It's a question that feels unsettling, almost unthinkable, because so much of what you call you is built from the past. Your name, your language, your beliefs, your relationships, your fears and hopes, they're all stitched together from remembered experiences. If memory were stripped away, would you still be yourself, or would you vanish into something unrecognizable? The instinctive answer is that without memory, identity would cease to exist. After all, memory is how you maintain a sense of continuity. It links the person you were 5 minutes ago to the one reading these words now. It's the glue that binds the story together. But look deeper, and the story starts to fracture, because even if memory shapes the story of who you think you are, it doesn't fully define who or what you actually are. Consider this. Memory is not a perfect archive. It's selective, malleable, constantly rewritten. Every time you recall a moment, you alter it slightly. You emphasize certain details and erase others. Over time, what you remember may bear little resemblance to what truly happened. Yet you still build your identity around these shifting reconstructions. The self, in this sense, is less a historical fact and more a myth, an ongoing work of fiction told by memory's unreliable narrator. And yet, even when memory falters, something remains. People suffering from severe amnesia may lose access to their autobiographical past, but they still have preferences, tendencies, and emotional responses. They still recognize certain patterns, still display quirks of personality, still are someone. Their story may be gone, but their being is not. This suggests that identity doesn't vanish with memory, it simply sheds its narrative skin. This brings us to an unsettling insight. Memory is not identity itself, it's the ghost that haunts it. It lingers around your sense of self, shaping and coloring it. But it's not the foundation. It's a layer, a mist that gives the illusion of solidity. And when that mist lifts, the ground beneath is still there, silent and unchanging. Memory's ghostly nature becomes clearer when you notice how much of it operates without your awareness. Many of your daily choices are influenced by memories you don't consciously recall. Habits, fears, instincts. They're all memory in motion. You don't need to remember burning your hand as a child to flinch from a hot stove. The memory is stored deeper, encoded into the body and nervous system. This implicit memory guides behavior, even when explicit memory, the one you can narrate, has faded into silence. It also reveals itself in subtler ways. A scent catches your attention, and suddenly you feel nostalgic, though you can't pinpoint why. A stranger's tone of voice unsettles you, echoing something long forgotten. These are memories operating beneath the surface, like whispers from the past, shaping the present, without needing to be heard. They're not stories you tell yourself, they're imprints left behind. This is why memory feels so ghost-like. It doesn't just record who you are, it haunts who you become. It shapes the edges of your choices, and the contours of your desires. And yet, for all its influence, it isn't you, it's not constant, it's not reliable. It can fade, distort, vanish, and still, something remains. Imagine waking up one day with complete amnesia. You don't remember your name, your past, your relationships. At first it seems like you've lost everything, but then you start to notice something strange. You still laugh at certain things, you still prefer certain tastes, you still gravitate towards certain people. The narrative is gone, but the essence persists. It's not memory that sustains this essence, it's something deeper, something that memory merely reflects. And yet, memory resists this realization. It insists on being the central character. It constantly points backward, saying, "This is who you've been, and therefore who you are." It defines your possibilities by what has already happened. But this is a trap, because as long as you believe memory is you, you remain bound to its patterns. You confuse the echo for the source. The truth is that memory is a tool, a useful one, but still a tool. It allows continuity, learning, identity construction. But like all tools, it can be set down, and when you do, something remarkable happens. The weight of the past begins to lift. The stories that defined you start to dissolve. What's left isn't blankness, but freedom, a version of yourself that isn't chained to what has been. This is why certain spiritual traditions place such emphasis on forgetting the self. They don't mean literal amnesia, they mean loosening memory's grip on identity, allowing yourself to exist without the constant compulsion to define who you are based on who you were. In that space, identity is no longer a story told by memory. It's an immediate presence, alive in this moment, untouched by yesterday. Perhaps this is the final lesson of memory's ghost. It's not meant to be believed, it's meant to be seen for what it is, a shadow cast by the past, drifting across the surface of the present. And when the shadow passes, you're still here, whole, aware, unwritten. You are not the story your memory tells about you. You are the silence it leaves behind. There's a peculiar kind of existence that becomes visible only when everything else disappears, when thoughts stop swirling, when memory loosens its grip, when even awareness begins to dissolve. What remains in that deep stillness is not a concept, not a story, not even a conscious self. It is something far more subtle and foundational. It is what's left over from presence itself. To understand this, imagine sitting in a room after everyone has left. The conversations are over, the laughter has faded, and the air is still. And yet, the room doesn't feel empty. It carries a residue of everything that once filled it. The warmth of human voices, the faint echo of movement, the lingering scent of life. Something remains, even when the source of that something is gone. That is what left over from presence feels like. Not the presence itself, but the quiet trace of it. We usually assume that presence and identity are identical. If you are present, you exist. If you are not, you vanish. But this assumption is too simplistic. Presence is the experience of existing, what it feels like to be here, now, in this body, in this moment. But what if identity runs deeper than that feeling? What if there's something that persists even after the experience fades? We get glimpses of this truth in the moments when presence seems to disappear. Think of deep sleep, where awareness is gone, but existence continues. Or the moments after a profound meditation, when there's no active sense of I am, but still something is. Even in unconsciousness, even when there's no self-reflection or sensation, your being doesn't vanish. It doesn't require constant confirmation to remain real. This leftover is not something you can point to. It has no form, no shape, no qualities you can describe. In fact, the moment you try to grasp it with words, it slips away because language belongs to the realm of presence, and this is what lingers after presence. It is in a way the background hum of existence. You don't notice it while the orchestra is playing, but when the music stops, the silence beneath it becomes apparent. Here's where the paradox deepens. This leftover identity is not something added to presence. It's not a hidden layer waiting to be revealed. It's what was always there, silently supporting everything else. Presence, awareness, memory, thought. They're all waves rising and falling on the surface. But beneath them, the ocean remains still. The leftover isn't a remnant of who you were. It's the foundation of who you've always been. The reason this is so difficult to see is that we are addicted to noise. We equate activity with existence. If we're not thinking, we feel empty. If we're not aware, we feel lost. If we're not present, we fear we've disappeared. But none of that is true. The leftover doesn't require activity to exist. It doesn't require your participation. It simply is, regardless of what you're doing or noticing. And this has profound implications for how we understand identity. Most of what we call self is actually just the sum of transient states, thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories. We think we are those things because they're visible and immediate. But the truth is that they come and go, and yet we persist. The you that existed before a thought will still exist after it. The you that was here before a memory surfaces will still be here when it fades. The you that remains when presence itself dissolves is the most fundamental version of you, unchanging, unconditioned, and unshakable. This is not an abstract idea. It's something you can sense in moments of deep stillness. Sit long enough, without trying to do anything, and you'll notice that even when the usual markers of self fall silent, something subtle endures. It doesn't think or speak. It doesn't have opinions or preferences, but it's undeniably there. It's the I beneath the I am. Realizing this is deeply freeing because it loosens the grip of impermanence. If your identity depends on presence, on being conscious, aware, and engaged, then it will always feel fragile, fleeting, at risk of slipping away. But if your identity is deeper than presence, then it's not threatened by change. It doesn't vanish when you're distracted, unconscious, or unaware. It doesn't disappear when life moves too fast or too slow. It's constant, it's patient, it's always waiting beneath the noise. This leftover is also indifferent. It doesn't care whether you're happy or sad, awake or asleep, enlightened or confused. It simply is. And in that simplicity lies its power. Because if identity is not dependent on any particular state, then no state, no thought, no feeling, no experience can define or diminish you. So, the next time you find yourself grasping for presence, trying desperately to be here now, or stay aware, pause. Let the effort drop. Let the presence itself fade, if it wants to, and then look deeper. What remains when there's nothing left to hold on to? What remains when the experience of existing disappears? That, quiet, vast, unchanging, is what was here before presence arrived, and what will remain long after it leaves. That is the leftover from presence. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is who you truly are. There are moments in life when you forget yourself entirely. They can happen in the middle of something extraordinary. A breathtaking view, a deep conversation, a sudden burst of laughter, or they can unfold during the most ordinary acts. Washing dishes, walking home, tying your shoes. For a brief instant, you're not thinking about who you are, what you're doing, or how you appear. There's no inner commentary, no self-consciousness. And yet, life continues. The world doesn't pause. You don't cease to exist. This is the strange and revealing state of being that arises when attention forgets you. We're conditioned to believe that attention is the glue holding the self together, that without constantly monitoring, evaluating, and narrating our experiences, our identity will slip away. But that isn't how reality works. In fact, Some of the most profound and peaceful moments you've ever experienced happened precisely because attention wasn't on you. It wasn't scrutinizing, analyzing, or comparing. It wasn't building a story around the moment. It simply forgot. This forgetting is not the same as neglect. It's not ignorance or inattention. It's more like a release, the dropping of a constant exhausting habit. Normally attention clings to the self, like a spotlight on a stage actor. It illuminates thoughts, emotions, desires, and fears, reinforcing the idea that these things are you. But when the spotlight turns elsewhere, when it falls on the scenery, the audience, or nothing at all, the actor doesn't vanish. They're still there, simply no longer the center of the scene. You can witness this in the phenomenon known as flow. When athletes describe being in the zone, or artists talk about losing themselves in their work, they're describing a state where attention has forgotten the self. Actions unfold effortlessly. Decisions happen without deliberation, and there's no need to narrate what's happening. The usual sense of me operating the machinery disappears, replaced by a seamless merging with the activity. And afterward, when you reflect on the experience, you might even struggle to explain it, because the one who would have been explaining wasn't there. This reveals something profound. The self that attention constantly builds is not necessary for life to happen. It's not even necessary for intelligence, creativity, or purpose. These things exist and function perfectly well without the constant interference of a narrator. In fact, they often function better without it. The trouble is, we've built our identities on being watched, by others, by society, and most importantly by ourselves. We believe that constant attention is proof of our existence. I think therefore I am becomes I notice myself, therefore I'm real. But what if the opposite is true? What if forgetting yourself is closer to the truth of what you are? When attention forgets you, something interesting happens to time as well. Minutes slip by unnoticed, and the distinction between past, present, and future seems to blur. That's because the self, the one who is always measuring, comparing, remembering, isn't present. And without it, reality loses its usual structure. There's no me moving through time. There's just this an unfolding without an observer to break it into moments. You might think this state is rare, reserved for meditation masters or peak performers, but it's not. It happens every day. The difference is that you rarely notice it, because the one who would notice, the self, has temporarily stepped aside. You might emerge from a conversation, realizing you didn't think about yourself once, or finish a long walk, and realize you were nowhere in your own mind the entire time. And yet, during those moments, you were alive, perhaps more alive than usual. This challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that attention is what keeps us grounded in reality. In truth, attention often distorts reality by filtering it through layers of judgment, expectation, and self-reference. When attention forgets you, those filters drop away, and what's left is raw, direct experience, life without commentary. But the most transformative insight of all is this: if you can exist fully when attention isn't on you, then you cannot be the thing that attention observes. The thoughts, feelings, and stories it clings to are not your essence. They are temporary appearances. The real you, the silent presence beneath it all, doesn't need to be remembered to exist. It doesn't depend on the spotlight. It doesn't require recognition. This realization is liberating. It means you don't have to constantly monitor yourself. You don't need to analyze every thought or measure every action. You can let attention wander. You can let it forget you, and in doing so, you don't lose yourself. You rediscover the part of you that was never dependent on being remembered. When attention forgets you, what remains is not emptiness but simplicity. It's not a void but a fullness that doesn't need to be noticed to be real. It's the part of you that exists before awareness turns inward, and after it moves on. It's the background hum of being that never stops, even when no one is listening. And perhaps that's the deepest truth of identity, that it doesn't need attention to exist. It's there when you're watching. It's there when you're forgotten. It's there always quiet, patient, waiting, just beyond the reach of the spotlight. From the moment you were born, roles began to shape you. You were someone's child, someone's student, someone's friend. Later, you might have become a partner, a parent, a leader, a believer. Each role came with expectations, behaviors, and scripts, some spoken aloud, others silently absorbed, and without noticing, you began to play them. Over time, the performance became so seamless, so automatic, that you started to believe the role was you. But what if it wasn't? What if, instead of playing the role has been playing you all along? It's an uncomfortable thought. Most people like to believe they're the authors of their identity, carefully crafting who they are. But if you look closely, much of what you call you was written before you had any say in it. Your culture handed you values. Your family handed you beliefs. Your society handed you definitions of success, failure, love, and worth. You didn't choose the script, you inherited it. And then, like a committed actor, you stepped onto the stage and performed your part. This performance isn't necessarily false. In fact, it often feels deeply authentic. You cry real tears, feel real joy, experience genuine pain, but authenticity doesn't prove ownership. An actor can fully embody a character and still walk away knowing it was just a role. The problem arises when you forget you're acting, when you become so immersed in the performance that you mistake the costume for your skin. Think about how easily identity shifts with context. At work, you speak one way, at home, another. With friends, you become a different version of yourself. In solitude, another emerges still. These shifts happen so naturally you hardly notice them, but they reveal something profound. Identity is not fixed. It's fluid. It changes with the scene. And if it changes with the scene, how can it be the core of who you are? The truth is that roles have their own momentum. They shape your decisions, influence your reactions, even dictate your desires. Once you accept a role, it starts to act through you. A successful person must chase goals. A good parent must sacrifice. A strong man must not cry. These behaviors arise, not because your essence demands them, but because the role does. You follow the script, even when it doesn't serve you, because that's what the part requires. This is how roles play you. They limit the range of who you can be by defining what is appropriate for the character you believe you are, and in doing so, they keep you tethered to a version of reality that might not even be yours. You're no longer acting freely, you're reacting predictably. But what happens when the role collapses? When the job ends, the children grow up, the belief system crumbles. Many people experience a profound identity crisis in such moments. Without the role, they feel lost, empty, invisible. If I'm not this, they ask, then who am I? The question is painful because it exposes a deeper truth. They never knew who they were beyond the performance. Yet, this collapse is not a tragedy. It's an invitation. It's a chance to step off the stage and see what remains when the costume falls away. And what remains is startling in its simplicity. It's not a title or a label. It's not a narrative or a script. It's the raw, unconditioned presence that's been here all along, silently watching each character come and go. This is why people who go through deep identity loss, after retirement, after heartbreak, after spiritual awakening, often describe a paradoxical sense of liberation. At first it feels like death, but then as the dust settles, something deeper begins to breathe. It's not someone new. It's not another role waiting to replace the old one. It's life itself, alive, spontaneous, free from the constraints of performance. Recognizing the role's influence doesn't mean you have to abandon it. Roles are useful. They give structure to society and meaning to relationships. The key is not to confuse the role with the self. You can be a teacher without believing that teaching defines your worth. You can be a parent without thinking that parenthood contains your entire identity. You can even be a spiritual seeker without forgetting that what you're seeking might be the very thing that exists beyond all seeking. Once you see roles for what they are, you can wear them lightly. You can step into them fully when needed, and step out when they no longer serve. You can let them shape your actions without letting them imprison your being, and in doing so, you reclaim something profound, the ability to exist without needing to be something specific. The truth is, you've played many roles, and will likely play many more. They will change, evolve, and disappear. But beneath them, something remains constant, a silent witness untouched by the stories unfolding on the stage. That witness is not a character. It's not part of the play. It's the space in which the play appears. And once you recognize that space as who you truly are, roles lose their power to define you. They no longer play you. They become what they were always meant to be, temporary expressions of something far deeper, far freer, and far more real. Imagine standing in a room where incense has been burning for hours. The flame is gone, the stick is reduced to ash, but the air is still thick with scent. It lingers in the curtains, clings to the walls, seeps into your clothes. Even with the source extinguished, its presence remains. This is what the mind does with identity. It leaves traces, residues, subtle imprints that continue to shape experience long after the original self has faded. This is the mind's leftover smoke. Consider how thoughts operate. You don't choose them deliberately. They arise on their own, often shaped by past experiences. A childhood criticism might become a lifelong self-doubt. A single heartbreak might ripple into decades of guardedness. The original event is long gone, but its echo lingers. That echo shapes your choices, colors your perceptions, and whispers judgments into your ear, all without your awareness. This is the smoke at work. We often think of identity as a solid structure, a collection of beliefs, desires, and stories that define who we are. But in reality, it's far more vaporous. It's a process, one that generates patterns, habits, and reactions that persist, even when we're no longer consciously maintaining them. These patterns are like smoke, intangible yet pervasive, invisible yet unmistakable, and once they settle into the fabric of the mind, they're hard to notice, let alone clear. The same is true for beliefs. Many of the opinions you hold most firmly aren't conscious decisions, but inherited patterns, residues from parents, teachers, media, or culture. They're not actively chosen. They're passively absorbed, and because they feel familiar, you mistake them for truth. But familiarity is not truth. It's just smoke, evidence of a fire that once burned but no longer does. This is why even profound insights into the nature of self don't immediately free us. You might intellectually understand that identity is an illusion, that thoughts are not you, that the I is a narrative. And yet, hours later, you still feel insulted by a comment, jealous of a success, terrified of rejection. Why? Because the insight was the extinguishing of the flame, but the smoke remains. Conditioning doesn't disappear just because you see through it. It lingers, often long after the fire has gone out. The most insidious part of this leftover smoke is how it hides in plain sight, because it doesn't speak loudly. You stop questioning it. Because it doesn't announce itself as not you, you accept it as part of who you are. But if you were to pause and examine many of your automatic responses, your instinctive fears, your reflexive opinions, your unconscious desires, you might discover they're not truly yours at all. They're simply leftovers drifting through the mind. This recognition changes everything. Because once you stop identifying with the smoke, it starts to lose its grip. It still drifts through the air, but you don't breathe it in as deeply. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding consciously. And over time, as you continue to notice without clinging, the smoke thins, the mind clears. The metaphor extends even further. Sometimes, the smoke itself can be a teacher. It reveals where the fire once was. A deep, unexplainable fear might point to a wound that needs tending. A recurring pattern of anger might highlight a value you've been ignoring. The smoke doesn't just obscure, it also guides. It tells the story of what shaped you, and in doing so, gives you the chance to release what no longer serves. But here's the crucial point. Leftover smoke is not proof of failure, it's proof of humanity. The goal is not to eliminate every trace of conditioning, that's impossible, but to recognize it for what it is. When you feel a surge of anger, you don't have to identify with it. When an anxious thought arises, you don't have to believe it's telling the truth. When a desire emerges, you don't have to assume it's your deepest will. You can see these things as patterns, ghostly residues, rather than as the essence of who you are. So the next time you notice an old belief resurfacing or an ancient fear whispering in your ear, pause before you react. Ask yourself, is this me? Or is this smoke? Is this my essence? Or just the lingering trace of something that once was? That simple question can loosen the hold of even the most persistent conditioning. But there's another layer to this. Even if every trace of smoke were to disappear, if every pattern dissolved, every belief loosened, every reaction ceased, something deeper would still remain. That something is the open space the smoke once filled, and that space, vast and unconditioned, is closer to your true nature than any story the mind could ever tell. It's not defined by the residue of the past. It's not shaped by memory, thought, or conditioning. It simply is. The more you rest in that space, the less the smoke matters. It may come and go, but you are not its prisoner. You are the room it drifts through, not the scent itself. You are the stillness that remains when the air clears, not the patterns that temporarily cloud it. And as you keep asking it, as you keep watching the smoke instead of becoming it, you'll find that the air grows clearer. What's left is not a new version of you, but the real one, the one that's been here all along, patiently waiting beneath the haze. We're taught from the moment we can speak that the world requires an observer, that nothing is truly real, unless someone is there to see, name, and interpret it. A sunset must be witnessed to be beautiful. A thought must be noticed to be meaningful. A self must be observed to exist. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if form, the shape of reality, the structure of identity, the essence of being, continues on perfectly well even without anyone watching? This is the paradox at the heart of form without the observer. To begin, imagine a forest deep in the mountains where no human eyes ever look. The trees still grow. The rain still falls. The moss still creeps up the bark. Whether or not anyone is there to admire or describe it, the forest remains itself, complete, whole, and unbothered by absence. Now, take that same idea and apply it to your own being. What if you also exist in this way? What if, beneath all the watching, labeling, and narrating, there's a form of you that simply is, independent of perception? We often believe identity is inseparable from observation. I know who I am because I reflect on myself. I understand my thoughts because I watch them. But if you look closely, the watching itself is not constant. It flickers on and off throughout the day. Sometimes it's sharp and deliberate. Other times it vanishes completely, during moments of intense focus, deep sleep, or even spontaneous joy. Yet during those gaps, you don't disappear. Your body still breathes, your cells still repair themselves, your mind still processes stimuli. Life continues even when no one is consciously there to witness it. This realization points to a deeper truth. The observer is not the foundation of identity. It's a temporary function layered on top of it. The body, the mind, and the deeper sense of being do not rely on observation to exist. They are not created by attention. They are revealed through it. A simple way to see this is to watch how your body moves in habitual ways without any need for conscious control. You don't think about how to walk across the room, yet your muscles coordinate perfectly. You don't plan every inhale and exhale, yet your lungs keep rhythm. The form of you operates without a watcher, because the watcher is not the one doing the work. The same is true psychologically. Countless thoughts, decisions, and emotional responses arise automatically, shaped by networks of memory and instinct. The observer merely arrives late to the scene and claims ownership. It's not just the body or mind that exist without an observer. Identity itself does too. Even when you're not actively thinking about who you are, there is still a you moving through the world. This isn't the constructed self with a name and a history. It's something simpler, a presence that underlies all the roles and narratives. It's the you that remains even when you're not telling yourself you exist. This concept can feel unsettling because it undermines the ego's central belief. I exist because I am aware, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Existence is primary, awareness is secondary. Form comes first, observation follows. The observer is not the author, it's the audience. And the play goes on whether or not the audience is watching. This insight also shifts how we understand suffering. Much of our pain comes not from what happens, but from how we observe and interpret what happens. A thought arises, and we label it bad. A feeling surfaces, and we cling to it, or push it away. But when observation is absent, when thoughts and feelings arise and pass without commentary, they lose much of their power. They are simply forms moving through form, events unfolding without a story attached. This is why practices like meditation often emphasize non-judgmental awareness. The goal is not to stop thoughts or eliminate feelings, but to stop confusing them with the observer's judgments. When you learn to let experiences unfold without needing to label or interpret them, you start to see the underlying truth. They were never dependent on your observation in the first place. They were happening all along. And this extends to identity itself. If form exists without the observer, then your deepest nature is not the one watching life happen. It's the field in which life happens. You are not the witness standing at the edge of the stage. You are the stage itself, the space that allows the play to unfold, whether or not anyone is paying attention. Understanding this brings a profound freedom. It means you no longer have to cling so tightly to self-awareness. You don't have to constantly reflect, evaluate, or explain yourself to prove you exist. You can let go of the exhausting need to know who you are, because whether you know it or not, you are. Whether you watch it or not, life continues. Whether you narrate it or not, the story unfolds. The universe existed long before there were eyes to see it. Your being existed long before you learned to think I am, and both will continue long after the observer's voice fades into silence. Identity is not the one watching the river flow. Identity is the river, moving, changing, unstoppable, even when no one is there to witness its passage. Stare at a bright light for a few seconds, then close your eyes. The light is gone, but an image lingers, faint, shifting, not quite real but undeniably there. It isn't the light itself, yet it is born from it. It's a memory etched into vision, a ghost of what once was. This is what the self becomes when you look closely enough, not a fixed entity, but an afterimage, a fading trace of experience that persists even after the source has disappeared. Most people spend their entire lives believing the self is a solid thing. It feels consistent, enduring, and continuous. I was the same person yesterday, and I'll be the same tomorrow. But this sense of continuity is an illusion, a cognitive trick created by memory, language, and the brain's need for stability. What you call me is not a permanent structure. It's the afterimage of 1,000 fleeting experiences stitched together into a single narrative. Consider how the brain works. Every second, it receives floods of sensory information, sights, sounds, smells, thoughts, memories. These moments are instantaneous, but your mind weaves them into a story. That story is what you experience as you. But like the afterimage of a light, it's not the real thing. It's the residue of what just happened, the echo of experience rather than the experience itself. Even your thoughts, the ones you identify with most closely, are already in the past by the time you're aware of them. Neuroscience shows that decisions are often made milliseconds before we consciously choose. The thought I decided is not the cause of the action, but the narrative that follows it. In other words, the self is always a step behind reality, explaining what's already happened rather than directing what's about to happen. This becomes even clearer when you examine memory. Think back to a significant event in your life. A childhood birthday, a painful loss, a moment of joy. What you're recalling isn't the event itself, but an afterimage of it, reshaped and reinterpreted over time. Each recollection is like tracing over an old drawing. With every pass, the lines shift, the colors fade, the details blur. Yet you continue to believe that this evolving image is you. It's the same with identity. The personality traits you list when someone asks who you are, introverted, creative, stubborn, kind, are snapshots of behaviors and tendencies that have already passed. They're not predictions of what you will do, they're descriptions of what you did. And yet, you cling to them as though they're permanent, forgetting that they too are afterimages, faint reflections of moments long gone. Why does the mind create these afterimages in the first place? Because it craves stability. A constantly shifting sense of self would be disorienting, even terrifying. The illusion of a continuous I provides comfort and coherence. It makes life navigable, but comfort is not the same as truth. And when you peer behind the illusion, you find that the self you think you are is always chasing the tail of the present, never quite catching up. This realization is both humbling and liberating. Humbling, because it reveals how little control the I actually has. You're not the architect of your existence, just the historian documenting it. But it's liberating, because it loosens the grip of identity. If the self is just an afterimage, it doesn't have to define you, it doesn't have to confine you. It's a reflection, not a prison. You can see this most clearly in moments when the afterimage dissolves entirely, those rare luminous instants when the mind stops clinging to the story. It might happen during meditation, in the presence of overwhelming beauty, or at the peak of creative flow. For a brief moment, the narrative of me drops away, and there's only this experience unfolding without an experiencer. And yet, life doesn't stop. Awareness doesn't disappear. Being continues, unburdened by the need to explain itself. This points to a profound truth. You are not the afterimage. You are the light that created it. The self that lingers in memory and language is not your essence. It's just the residue of essence. It's a helpful map, but it's not the territory. And once you understand this, you stop confusing the map for the destination. You stop clinging so tightly to the image, and start exploring the source. This shift in perspective changes how you relate to the past. You no longer feel bound by who you were, because who you were was never as fixed as you thought. It changes how you relate to the future too. You stop trying to project a rigid self into what's coming, and instead allow each moment to shape you anew. And most importantly, it changes how you relate to the present. You stop watching it through the lens of the afterimage, and start living directly in its light. The afterimage will always exist. The mind will always trace over the past, stitching it into identity, but you don't have to mistake that trace for the truth. You are not the story written about you. You are the blank page beneath the ink. You are not the fading glow. You are the light that shines before and beyond it. We often speak of consciousness as though it were the crown jewel of existence, the spark that makes life meaningful, the inner light without which everything would be darkness. But what if that's not entirely true? What if the essence of who you are doesn't vanish when consciousness fades, but instead reveals itself more clearly in the spaces where awareness no longer reaches? This is the quiet mystery of what remains once consciousness leaves. Think of sleep. Every night, consciousness slips away, and yet you don't die. The heart beats, the body heals, the mind processes, and in the deepest stages of dreamless rest, even awareness itself is absent. No thoughts, no memories, no sense of. Yet when you wake, there's a seamless continuity. The person who wakes is the same one who fell asleep. How is that possible if consciousness, supposedly the seat of identity, was nowhere to be found? The answer is that consciousness is not the foundation of self. It's a surface phenomenon. It's the sunlight that illuminates the landscape of experience, but it's not the land itself. Beneath it, deeper layers of identity continue to exist, untouched by whether or not they're being observed. They don't need consciousness to validate them. They are with or without it. We see this most clearly not in sleep, but in moments when consciousness flickers at the edges of life. Consider the accounts of people under deep anesthesia. For hours they have no awareness, no sense of time, no inner monologue, no memory. And yet, when they awaken, they are still themselves. They haven't become someone else in the interim. Their identity persisted even in the absence of any conscious experience. Something continued. Something deeper, quieter, more enduring than awareness. This becomes even more profound in the study of near-death experiences. Many report that during the period when consciousness appeared to vanish, when brain activity flatlined, there was still something, not a personality or a thought stream, but a kind of presence that existed beyond the usual boundaries of mind. Whether one interprets this as spiritual, neurological, or something else entirely, it points to the same underlying question: is consciousness truly the essence of who we are, or is it just one expression of something larger? Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. Some traditions, like Vedanta and certain schools of Buddhism, argue that consciousness is a tool, a mechanism through which reality becomes aware of itself, but not reality itself. Others, like certain materialist thinkers, argue that consciousness is an emergent property of physical processes, a temporary pattern that will fade when the body does. Yet both positions still point to the same mystery. If consciousness is temporary, something more fundamental must underlie it. You can sense this directly in those rare deep moments when the mind goes completely silent. It's not that you stop existing, it's that existing no longer needs to be confirmed by awareness. The need to know yourself disappears, and yet, there you are, wordless, thoughtless, present, like a mountain that remains unmoved when the fog lifts. Your being persists, steady and silent. There's a paradox here. Consciousness feels like the most intimate part of us, yet it's also the most transient. It comes and goes every day, cycling between waking and sleeping, expanding and contracting with attention. And when it leaves, it takes the stories with it, the worries, the ambitions, the self-narratives. What's left behind is something simpler, more elemental. It's not an idea of yourself. It's not even an experience of yourself. It's just being. And this just being is what many spiritual traditions point to as the essence of reality. It's not active. It doesn't think or perceive. It doesn't plan or desire. It doesn't even know itself as I. But it is undeniably there, constant, unshakable, enduring. It's the foundation upon which consciousness arises, and the ground to which it returns when it fades. This understanding has practical implications for how we live. Most of our anxiety stems from trying to protect the conscious self, its image, its plans, its preferences. But if identity extends beyond consciousness, then nothing essential is ever at risk. Sleep doesn't threaten it. Forgetfulness doesn't erase it. Even the loss of awareness itself cannot touch it. You don't need to hold on to yourself, because what's most real about you is not something you can lose. It also reframes our relationship with death. The greatest fear of dying is often the fear of consciousness ending, the fear that I will blink out of existence. But if consciousness is not the essence of you, if it's just a temporary surface phenomenon, then maybe death is not the disappearance of self, but a return to what was always there beneath it. This isn't something that can be proven. It's something that can only be sensed in the silence between thoughts, in the depth of dreamless sleep, in the profound stillness that exists when all interactivity stops. In those spaces, consciousness recedes, but something unmistakable remains. Something that doesn't speak or think, but quietly is. And perhaps that's the ultimate truth, that what you are doesn't begin with consciousness, and it doesn't end with it either. The light may flicker and fade, but the ground beneath it is eternal. And when the light goes out, when consciousness leaves, you don't fall into nothingness. You fall back into yourself. What if identity isn't something you are at all? What if it's simply what's left over? A faint trace, a lingering imprint, a residue of everything that's ever passed through you. Not the fire, but the ash. Not the wind, but the shape of the dunes it leaves behind. This is the unsettling idea behind identity as residue. The notion that who you think you are isn't a solid, permanent thing, but the cumulative sediment of experience, layered over time and left behind when everything else has moved on. To understand this, consider the way memory works. Every event you've ever lived through leaves a mark, but most of those marks are not conscious. They don't live as explicit stories or vivid images. Instead, they settle deeper, shaping preferences, fears, reflexes, and habits. The way you respond to a stranger's tone, the reasons certain songs make you cry, the pull you feel towards some people and away from others, these are not deliberate choices. They're residues. They're what's left behind after countless moments have come and gone. The same is true of thoughts and emotions. Each one is fleeting, arising, peaking, and fading like waves. But over time they deposit something subtle within you. Joy leaves warmth, loss leaves caution, shame leaves hesitation. These residues accumulate, forming layers so deep and so habitual that you stop noticing them. They become what you call your personality. They feel like you, but they're not. They're simply the leftover dust of everything that's touched you. We see this most clearly in trauma. A single event can ripple through decades, shaping behaviors and perceptions long after the details are forgotten. The original pain might fade, but its residue lingers, encoded in the body, embedded in the nervous system, whispering its influence into every decision you make. But it's not just pain that does this. Joy too leaves residue, so does love, curiosity, disappointment, and awe. Every experience, no matter how small, leaves a trace, and the sum of those traces is what you mistake for a fixed identity. But residue is not essence. It's not the flame itself, it's the soot on the walls after the fire has burned. And this distinction matters, because it reveals something profound. The you cling to so tightly is not a static thing. It's a constantly shifting collection of leftovers. Some are ancient and barely visible, others are recent and raw, but none of them are permanent. They can be softened, reshaped, even swept away. You've likely experienced this without realizing it. Think back to a period of your life when you were a very different person, when you believed things you now reject, behaved in ways that now seem alien. That old self hasn't disappeared. It's just been layered over by new residues. And if that's true, then who you are now is not final either. It's simply the current arrangement of sediment, one that will change as new experiences settle on top of the old. This idea can be both terrifying and liberating. It's terrifying because it undermines the comforting notion of a stable me. If identity is just residue, then there's nothing immutable to cling to. But it's liberating for the very same reason. If identity is residue, then it's not destiny. You're not trapped by your past. You're not defined by your scars. You're not condemned to keep playing out the same patterns forever. You can change the composition of the residue, or even choose to stop identifying with it altogether. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through awareness. When you begin to notice the residues operating in you, when you trace a reflexive reaction back to an old wound, or a limiting belief back to someone else's voice, you weaken their hold. They stop being invisible. And once they're visible, they're no longer in control. Awareness doesn't erase residue overnight, but it loosens it. It makes it lighter, more malleable, and over time, it allows something deeper to shine through. Because beneath the residue, beneath all the accumulated layers of memory, belief, and reaction, there is something that never changes, something that isn't touched by experience and doesn't depend on it. That something is what you truly are. It's not a product of the past. It's not shaped by what's happened to you. It's the blank canvas on which all residue settles, and it's still there, pure and untouched, beneath every layer you've ever built. This realization changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of clinging to identity as if it were a fixed truth, you begin to see it as weathering, impermanent, shifting, and ultimately superficial. You stop saying, "I am this way," and start saying, "This is what's been left behind." And in that shift, you create space for transformation. You allow for the possibility that the layers can thin, the patterns can change, the residue can clear. In the end, identity is not the story itself. It's the dust the story leaves behind. And when you stop mistaking the dust for the house, you realize you are not the residue, you are the space beneath it. You are not the imprint, you are the ground upon which the imprint appears and disappears. And once you know that, the grip of the past loosens, the weight of who you are becomes lighter, and for the first time, you catch a glimpse of what's always been hiding beneath the layers. Not a person, not a story, not a self, but the vast unmarked stillness that remains when all residue is swept away. We tend to think of silence as the absence of something, the pause between notes, the gap between words, the emptiness left behind when the noise stops. But silence is not emptiness. It's not a void. It's a container. It holds things. It shapes them. And in the deepest sense, it reveals truths that noise can never show. When identity, thought, memory, and even awareness fall away, what remains is silence. And yet, that silence is not barren. It's full. The question is, what does it hold? Most people live their lives avoiding silence. We fill every empty moment with sound, distraction, or activity. We fear stillness because it strips away the familiar layers of the self. In silence, there's nothing to hide behind, no story to narrate, no identity to perform, no thoughts to latch onto. And so we resist it. But if we can learn to sit with it, to let it stretch out and envelop us, something remarkable happens. Beneath the absence of noise, we begin to sense the presence of something deeper, something that's always been there, quietly waiting. At first, the silence is uncomfortable. It feels like loss. It feels like something's missing, like you are missing. But the longer you stay with it, the more you realize that silence is not the absence of self. It's the backdrop against which self appears and disappears. It's the ground that holds everything that comes and goes. The thoughts, the stories, the emotions. They're like clouds drifting across a sky. Silence is the sky itself, unchanging, vast, and always there, even when hidden. And here's the paradox. Silence doesn't just remain when identity fades. It reveals what's left behind. It shows you that the essence of who you are is not dependent on movement or noise. It's not the chatter of the mind or the narrative of the eye. It's something that cannot be spoken, but is always present, silently holding everything together. This is why silence has always played such a central role in spiritual practice. Monks, mystics, and philosophers across cultures retreat into silence not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. In silence, the superficial layers fall away. The roles and stories lose their grip. Even thought itself, so often mistaken for identity, fades into the background, and in that emptiness, something far more profound comes into focus, being itself. What silence holds is not a personality. It's not an opinion or a belief. It's not even an identity in the conventional sense. It's a kind of presence without attributes, a simple, undeniable isness. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. But it's there, quietly sustaining everything. It's the hum beneath existence, the pulse beneath thought, the stillness beneath movement. You can sense it in fleeting moments throughout your life, in the hush that follows a deep breath, in the stillness that settles after a storm, in the brief pause between a question and its answer. These are glimpses of the silence that holds you even when you're not paying attention. And if you lean into those moments, if you allow them to expand, you begin to realize that silence isn't something you step into, it's something you were never separate from in the first place. This realization can change how you see yourself, because if silence holds everything, your thoughts, your memories, your identity, then you are not any of those things. You are the space that contains them. You're not the story, you're the page it's written on. You're not the song, you're the silence that gives the notes meaning. You are not the self you've been narrating all these years. You are the stillness that allows that self to exist in the first place. And with that realization comes freedom. When you no longer mistake yourself for the noise loses its power. Thoughts may come and go, but they don't define you. Emotions may rise and fall, but they don't imprison you. Stories may begin and end, but they don't exhaust what you are. All of them are temporary. All of them are surface. The silence beneath them is eternal. There's also a deep peace in knowing that silence holds everything without judgment. It doesn't prefer one thought over another, one emotion over another. It doesn't cling to the pleasant or reject the painful. It simply holds it all, equally, unconditionally. And if you are that silence, then you too are capable of holding your experience in the same way. You don't need to fix every thought or resist every feeling. You can simply let them pass through, knowing they are not the essence of you. The mind will always return to noise. It's what it does. Thoughts will come, identity will rebuild itself. Stories will resume. But once you've glimpsed the silence beneath it all, the noise no longer feels so absolute. You know it's temporary. You know its surface. And you know that, beneath it, something vast, quiet, and unshakable is holding everything in place. In the end, silence is not a place you visit. It's not a state you achieve. It's what's left when everything else falls away, and what it holds, what it's been holding all along, is you. What remains of you when even awareness itself fades? Not thoughts, not memories, not even the quiet presence that notices them. Just the faintest trace, like the imprint a body leaves on a mattress long after it's risen, or the warmth lingering in a chair where someone once sat. It's easy to assume that without awareness, nothing remains. After all, how can there be a you if there's nothing there to know you exist? And yet, this assumption is precisely what this section challenges. Because identity, at its deepest level, may be less about knowing and more about being known into existence by existence itself, a trace left behind even when no one is watching. To grasp this, think about the body. It doesn't need awareness to keep living. Your heart beats without your permission. Your lungs draw air without your instruction. Your cells grow, repair, and die without you ever noticing. Awareness can step out of the room, and yet, the body continues its ancient rhythm. Life leaves traces of itself, even when no one is there to observe it. And the same might be true of identity, not as an active presence, but as an imprint, a mark that reality leaves behind. Memory itself is evidence of this. You don't consciously store every detail of your day. Most experiences pass unnoticed, and yet, days or even decades later, a scent, a sound, or a place can awaken a forgotten moment. It's as though the mind left a trail of fingerprints without realizing it. These traces are not actively maintained. They simply are, and they reveal something profound. Awareness is not the only force at work in creating. Much of who you are is written passively, unconsciously into the fabric of your being. This becomes especially apparent when you consider states where awareness vanishes entirely, dreamless sleep, anesthesia, or deep unconsciousness. During these times, there's no observer, no thinker, no I present, and yet, something persists. The body wakes up and remembers how to walk, how to speak, how to love. The sense of continuity remains. It's as though life itself has been carrying the thread, even while awareness was away. This trace is not something you control or even contribute to. It's more like gravity, an invisible force that holds everything together without needing to be noticed. It's the residue of being, the echo of existence. And unlike awareness, it doesn't fade in and out. It's not something you have to cultivate. It's always there, written into the deepest layers of what it means to exist. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine a coastline shaped by centuries of waves. The waves themselves come and go, rise and fall, appear and vanish. But over time they carve the shore into cliffs and coves, leaving behind a permanent mark. Awareness is like the waves, dynamic, ever-changing, momentary. But the trace is the coastline, slowly, silently shaped by every moment that has ever passed through you. This insight reframes the way we think about identity. We often imagine the self as something fragile and dependent, something that must be constantly reaffirmed through thought, memory, and awareness. But perhaps the truth is the opposite. Perhaps identity is what remains after all those things fall away. It's the shape carved into the universe by your existence. It's the weight you leave in the fabric of reality, whether you're awake to it or not. This perspective also changes how we think about loss, especially the fear of losing ourselves. People often worry about memory loss, unconsciousness, or even death as the ultimate erasure of who they are. But what if nothing is ever fully erased? What if everything you are leaves a trace that lingers, even when awareness cannot hold on to it? This trace might not be you in the personal sense, your stories, your ambitions, your preferences, but it is still the mark of your being, the evidence that you were. Even more radically, this suggests that identity might not belong to you alone. The traces you leave, your words, your actions, the way you shape others' lives, continue long after awareness departs. The laugh you shared, the kindness you offered, the pain you caused, these ripples extend outward, intersecting with the traces of others, creating patterns far beyond what awareness could ever grasp. In this way, identity is less a possession and more a contribution. It's not something you own, it's something you leave behind. And perhaps this is why the deepest spiritual traditions speak, not of finding the self, but of dissolving it. Because once awareness, thought, and memory fall away, what remains is not nothingness, but a subtle presence. A trace etched into the fabric of reality. And that trace doesn't need to know itself. It doesn't need to think. It doesn't need to be aware. It simply is. In the end, identity might not be the loud, persistent voice we think it is. It might not even be the quiet awareness beneath the noise. It might be something quieter still. The invisible trail we leave behind in every breath, every action, every heartbeat. And if that's true, then you don't disappear when awareness does. You don't dissolve into nothing when the lights go out. You remain like a footprint in the sand, fading perhaps, but never entirely gone. Imagine walking into a theater long after a play has ended. The stage is empty, the lights are dim, and the audience has gone home. Yet if you stand there long enough, you can still feel something in the air, a faint echo of the performance, a trace of energy that lingers even though the actors have left. The story, though finished, seems to hover in the space, as if refusing to die. This is the paradox of identity too. Even when the actor is gone, when awareness, memory, and even the sense of self have vanished, something remains, and that something is often more revealing than the performance itself. For most of your life, you've been playing roles. You've acted as a friend, a sibling, a partner, a thinker, a dreamer. These roles feel deeply personal, almost sacred. You identify with them so strongly that you forget their performances. But every role, no matter how consuming, eventually ends. Children grow up, jobs change, relationships shift. Even the way you think of yourself evolves. The stage resets, the costumes are taken off, and the actor, the version of you that once felt so central, steps aside. And yet, the story doesn't end there. The role leaves traces, impressions on others, habits in yourself, ripples in the world that continue to unfold. A teacher's words shape a student's future. A parent's love echoes through generations. A cruel remark spoken decades ago still lives in someone's memory. These lingering effects don't require the actor's presence. They persist even when the actor is long gone. And in that persistence lies a deeper, more enduring form of identity, one that isn't tied to performance at all. This idea is both humbling and liberating. It's humbling because it reminds you that the you fight so hard to protect is temporary. No matter how strong your personality, how powerful your will, how carefully you build your story, the actor will eventually exit the stage. Consciousness will fade, memory will dissolve, even the name people once associated with you will eventually be forgotten. But it's liberating because it shows that you are more than the sum of those performances. The impact of your existence extends far beyond your awareness of it. Think of a great artist or philosopher. The individual is gone, but their work continues to shape the world. Their thoughts, expressed centuries ago, still move people they never met. Their ideas ripple through societies that never knew their name. The actor is gone, but the play goes on. And while most of us will never leave legacies on that scale, the principle is the same. The essence of what we are outlives the performance we believe ourselves to be. This also happens internally. Within you are countless influences from actors who have long since left your stage. Your personality contains fragments of your parents' words, your teachers' lessons, your friends' laughter, and even strangers' kindness. None of those people are present in those moments, and yet they continue to act through you. Their roles have ended, but the imprint remains, and in many ways those imprints are now part of your identity. This challenges the way we think about self in a profound way. We tend to see identity as a single, continuous actor, a stable I'm moving through time. But perhaps it's more accurate to think of identity as a relay, a series of roles passed from one actor to the next, each leaving traces that shape the next performance. The you that exists today is the sum of countless performances, your own and others, woven together into something that appears coherent but is in truth fluid and evolving. It also forces us to rethink what it means to end. The fear of death, for example, often stems from the belief that once the actor is gone, everything stops. But what if the opposite is true? What if the end of the actor is simply the point where the story detaches from the performer? What if the most enduring part of you isn't the conscious self that says I, but the ripple that self leaves behind? This perspective can change how you live. If you know the actor will leave the stage, you stop clinging so tightly to the performance. You stop obsessing over how you appear, how you're remembered, how much control you have. Instead, you focus on the substance of the play. You put your energy into what truly matters: kindness, curiosity, creativity, knowing that these things will outlast you. You stop trying to be immortal through ego and start participating in the quiet immortality of influence. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that even after the actor steps off stage, the stage itself remains. The story continues to unfold. The universe keeps moving. Life keeps expressing itself. And in that continued movement, there is a part of you, a subtle, impersonal part, that never really leaves. It doesn't need to be remembered. It doesn't need to be witnessed. It's woven into the fabric of existence itself. So when the final curtain falls, when the lights go dark, and the actor takes their bow, don't mistake the end of the performance for the end of the story. The actor is gone, yes, but the stage is still here. The echoes still ring. The traces still shape the world. And somewhere, in ways you'll never fully see or understand, you are still part of it all. There's a moment, often unnoticed and unrecorded, where identity makes one final attempt to hold on before it dissolves completely. It's the last flicker of a candle, just before darkness fills the room. The brief, trembling light that tries to convince you it's still in control. In the journey of unraveling the self, this final moment is the most subtle and the most deceptive, because even as everything else falls away, thought, memory, story, and even awareness, identity refuses to vanish quietly. It wants to be the last thing standing. This last flicker appears in many forms. Sometimes it's a thought, I am the one experiencing this. Sometimes it's a subtle sense of ownership. I am the witness to my own dissolution. And sometimes it's nothing more than a faint tension, a lingering impulse to label or define what's happening. Whatever shape it takes, its purpose is the same: to preserve a sense of me in a reality that no longer requires one. This is not surprising. Identity is built on continuity. It exists by weaving the present moment into a coherent narrative that stretches back into the past and forward into the future. It needs to believe it has always been there, and that it will always remain. So when it's threatened, when the foundation begins to crack, identity clings harder than ever. It resists its own disappearance with quiet desperation. You might encounter this during deep meditation, moments of intense presence, or profound existential reflection. You reach a point where thoughts have slowed, the stories have collapsed, and even the sense of a separate observer has begun to dissolve. And yet, just before everything falls silent, a subtle whisper arises. Ah, I am the one who has reached this state. That whisper is the last flicker. It's identity trying to sneak back in through the back door, claiming credit for the very process that is about to erase it. This flicker is not malicious. It's not a flaw or a mistake. It's simply what identity does, like a dying flame feeding on its final bit of fuel. The self feeds on recognition. As long as there's a point of reference, a name, a thought, a witness, it has a reason to persist. The challenge is not to fight this impulse, but to see it clearly for what it is, a reflex, not a truth. And when you see it clearly, something remarkable happens. The flicker loses its power. The final I thought, the one that says, I am the witness, or I understand now, is revealed as just another momentary appearance. It's no more significant than a passing breeze or a fleeting sound. You don't have to suppress it. You don't even have to reject it. You simply stop identifying with it. And when you do, the flame naturally extinguishes itself. What follows is not nothingness. It's not a blank void or an annihilation of self. It's more like a vast, quiet spaciousness, an openness in which everything continues to arise and pass without needing to belong to anyone. Life flows, but there's no I at its center. Thoughts happen, but there's no thinker. Choices unfold, but there's no chooser. It's not that identity has been destroyed, it's that its illusion is no longer necessary. This post-identity state can feel paradoxical. On one hand, it's deeply familiar, as if you've returned to something that was always there but unnoticed. On the other, it's profoundly foreign, because the usual point of reference, the I who observes and interprets, is gone. What's left is experience without ownership, being without becoming, awareness without self-awareness. It's life stripped of the illusion of a central narrator. This final flicker of identity is also deeply instructive. It reveals the mechanism by which the illusion sustains itself. It shows you that identity isn't a fixed thing, it's a recurring gesture, a a constant reaching towards solidity in a world that's inherently fluid. And once you see that gesture clearly, you realize it was never necessary. Reality doesn't need a narrator. Experience doesn't need a center. Existence doesn't need to say I am in order to be. This understanding has profound implications for how you live. If identity is just a flicker, brief, insubstantial and ultimately unnecessary, then you don't need to defend it so fiercely. You don't need to build walls around it or protect it from change. You don't need to be terrified of losing it. Because the truth is, there's nothing to lose. The flame was never the source of light. It was just a tiny temporary manifestation of a much deeper luminosity that was always there. In fact, once the flicker dies, life often becomes brighter, not darker. Without the constant interference of the eye, the world appears more vivid, more immediate, more alive. Moments feel fuller because they're no longer filtered through the lens of self. Relationships deepen because they're no longer shaped by the need to defend a personal story. Even suffering changes. It still arises, but it's no longer your suffering. It's simply part of the flow. And perhaps that's the final lesson of the last flicker. Identity was never as essential as it believed. It was never the source of continuity, meaning, or existence. It was a brief, beautiful, necessary illusion, a small flame dancing on the surface of something infinitely larger. And when that flame goes out, the darkness that follows is not emptiness. It's the vastness of what was always there, quietly holding everything together. Long before you learned to name yourself, before you could think I am, before memory began weaving its intricate stories, your body already knew how to be. It was breathing, digesting, responding, adapting. It was reading the world and reacting to it with an intelligence that required no awareness and no identity. This truth remains: the body knows far more than the mind admits. And in the search for who we truly are, beyond awareness, language, and self-concept, we often overlook the most obvious clue, the silent, embodied wisdom that's been guiding us from the very beginning. The body is the first and most honest witness to existence. It doesn't operate according to belief or opinion. It doesn't need validation or understanding. It doesn't argue with reality. It responds to it. Your heartbeat accelerates before your mind registers fear. Your muscles tense before a conscious thought of danger arises. Your skin warms before you realize you're blushing. These responses are not chosen. They are known. They emerge from a primal intelligence deeper than thinking, an intelligence that existed before you did and will continue even if you disappear. This embodied knowing is not limited to survival instincts. It shapes every moment of your experience. Think of the subtle ways your posture shifts in the presence of someone you trust versus someone you fear. Consider the heaviness in your chest after a heartbreak, or the inexplicable calm that washes over you in nature. These aren't metaphors, they're messages. They're the body's language, communicating truths the mind is often too distracted or too stubborn to hear. And more often than not, they reveal aspects of yourself that the intellect cannot grasp. The mind likes to believe it's in charge. It spins elaborate narratives about who you are, what you want, and why you do what you do. But the body tells a different story, one written not in words but in sensations, rhythms and reflexes. And this story is often closer to the truth. You might think you've forgiven someone, but if your stomach knots when you hear their name, the body knows otherwise. You might believe you're over a trauma, but if your breath shortens when a door slams, the body still remembers. These contradictions are not failures, they're invitations. They're signals pointing toward the deeper layers of self that exist beneath the surface of awareness. One of the most remarkable aspects of the body's knowledge is how much of it operates without you. Digestion, circulation, immune response. These complex systems coordinate perfectly without any conscious input. But even beyond biology, the body learns and remembers in ways the mind cannot. It learns how to walk, to dance, to balance, to ride a bike, skills so deeply embodied that you don't think about them once they're mastered. They become part of you in a way that's more fundamental than memory. Even if you forget how you learned them, the body never forgets that it knows. This embodied memory can also hold what the mind would rather forget. Trauma, for example, is often less a story we tell ourselves and more a pattern etched into the body, a contraction, a posture, a persistent vigilance. These embodied residues can outlast conscious memory, surfacing in ways that seem mysterious or irrational, and yet, they are evidence that you are more than your thoughts. They reveal a self that exists not in language or awareness, but in flesh and nerve, heartbeat and breath. Recognizing this truth can radically shift how we understand identity. If the body continues to act, learn, respond, and remember without conscious involvement, then clearly you are more than the thinking self. Identity extends beyond awareness. It lives in the pulse of the heart, the rhythm of breath, the subtle intelligence of muscle and bone, and that means even when awareness fades, in deep sleep, unconsciousness or death, some part of you remains, woven into the living fabric of the world. This perspective also reframes what it means to know yourself. True self-knowledge isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's an embodied practice. It involves listening to what the body is saying, not interpreting it through thought, but feeling it directly. It's learning to notice how your chest tightens around certain truths, how your gut responds before your mind forms a judgment, how your breath changes when something resonates deeply. The body is not separate from the self. It is the self expressed in a language older than words. There's a deep humility in this realization. The body reminds us that we are not nearly as separate, isolated, or independent as we believe. We are ecosystems of intelligence, biological, emotional, sensory, intertwined with the world around us. We breathe the same air, respond to the same gravity, obey the same ancient rhythms, and in that interconnectedness, the illusion of a discrete I begins to dissolve. What's left is not a mind thinking about itself, but a living organism participating in life. In the end, what the body knows is not just how to keep you alive. It knows how to be. It knows how to belong, how to adapt, how to communicate with the world without needing to define itself. It knows silently and without effort that existence is not a concept to be grasped, but a reality to be lived. And if you can learn to trust that knowing, to listen to it more deeply than you listen to your thoughts, you may discover that the truth of who you are has been pulsing beneath your skin all along. There comes a point in the unraveling of identity when even the concept of self, refined, stripped down and deconstructed, no longer fits. It's not that it disappears entirely, but rather that it dissolves into something so vast and unbounded that to call it you would be to misunderstand it. It's here, beyond all recognition, that the final illusion begins to collapse. And what's left is not a person, not a personality, not even a consciousness that can say I am. What remains is reality itself, whole, undivided, and indifferent to the labels we once clung to. From birth, identity is built through recognition. A baby learns its name and begins to associate that sound with itself. A child is praised or scolded and starts shaping behavior to fit those responses. Society reflects back labels: clever, shy, strong, weak, and over time, the self becomes a collection of reflections, like a mirror pieced together from others' perceptions. We learn to recognize ourselves in the gaze of the world. But what happens when the mirrors shatter? What if every reflection vanished? Would you still exist? The immediate instinct is to say yes, of course you would, but pause and look deeper. Much of what you take to be yourself is built from these recognitions. You are who you are because of the language you've been taught, the roles you've played, the names you've been given, the stories you've repeated. Strip those away, and the structure begins to crumble. Without memory, without reflection, without recognition, what remains? Can you still point to something and call it me? This is not a purely philosophical question. It's an experience that occurs sometimes unexpectedly, in moments of deep meditation, grief, awe, or silence. The usual anchors of self loosen, the familiar reference points dissolve, and for a fleeting moment, there is nothing to recognize. No name, no story, no boundary. The mind panics, searching for something familiar to hold on to. But if you resist the urge to grasp, if you allow the unfamiliarity to expand, something extraordinary happens. Existence continues, effortlessly, even without recognition. This reveals a fundamental truth. Recognition is not a requirement for being. The ocean doesn't need to call itself ocean to exist. A tree doesn't need to know it's a tree to grow. The stars don't need to recognize their own light to shine. And you, at the deepest level, don't need to know you exist to exist. Being is primary, recognition is secondary. But this realization also exposes the fragility of identity. All the things we thought were essential, our names, our histories, our beliefs, turn out to be surface phenomena. They are tools, not truths. They help us navigate the world, but they are not the foundation of who we are. And once they're gone, once we move beyond all recognition, we encounter something that's been hiding in plain sight all along. Existence without identity. This state is difficult to describe, because language itself is built on recognition. It assumes subject and object, self and other. But beyond recognition, those distinctions blur. There's no I experiencing the world, and no world being experienced. There's just this, immediate, unfiltered, and whole. It's not an annihilation of the self, but a revelation of something deeper than self, something that was always there but obscured by the noise of recognition. This experience can feel disorienting at first. The mind, which has spent a lifetime categorizing and labeling, doesn't know how to operate without its usual reference points. It may even interpret this loss of recognition as a kind of death, and in a way it is, but not the death of you. It's the death of everything you thought you were. What's left is not absence but fullness, not nothingness but everything. From this vantage point, even the question, who am I, loses meaning. The search for identity, once so urgent and consuming, seems unnecessary. There's no I to define, there's no self to locate, there's just being, vast, continuous, unbroken. And in that realization, a profound peace emerges. You no longer have to struggle to be someone. You no longer have to maintain an image, or defend a story. You no longer have to recognize yourself to know that you are. What's more, this perspective transforms how you relate to the world. If there's no clear boundary between you and everything else, then everything is, in a sense, you. The line between subject and object dissolves. The separation between self and other evaporates. Compassion deepens because there is no other to separate from. Fear loosens because there is no self to protect. Even death loses its sting because there is no individual to end, only a continuous flow that changes form. In the end, going beyond all recognition is not about losing yourself. It's about discovering that you were never what you thought you were in the first place. The person, the story, the identity, these were temporary garments. Useful, perhaps even beautiful, but never essential. What's essential cannot be named, cannot be recognized, cannot be contained. It simply is. And that is the final paradox of identity. The closer you come to truly knowing yourself, the more you realize there is nothing to know. The deeper you look, the more you see that what you are cannot be seen. And when recognition falls away entirely, what remains is not a person, not a soul, not a consciousness, but life itself, unbound and eternal, flowing on without needing a name. Every line, no matter how long it stretches, eventually converges at a single point on the horizon, a place where distance collapses and separation disappears. In art, this is called the vanishing point, the spot where parallel lines meet and perspective dissolves. In the exploration of identity, there is a similar point, a moment where the distinctions that once defined you blur into nothing. It is here at this vanishing point that the journey of self-inquiry reaches its quiet conclusion, and what you find there is not a perfected version of yourself, but the startling realization that there was never anyone there to begin with. The search for identity often begins with accumulation. We spend years gathering pieces to define who we are, names, titles, experiences, memories. We build our self-image layer by layer, hoping that if we add enough substance we'll finally feel complete. Later, when we grow suspicious of these layers, we start peeling them away, stripping off the labels, questioning the stories, rejecting the roles. This process can take a lifetime, but whether you're adding or subtracting, you're still circling around the same assumption that there's a self underneath it all, waiting to be revealed. But what if there isn't? What if, when every layer is peeled back, what's left is not a hidden core but empty space? This is the disorienting insight at the vanishing point. After a lifetime of seeking, you arrive to find nothing. No solid I, no enduring essence, no observer watching from behind the curtain. There is experience, yes. There is awareness, yes. But there is no owner of it. There is no central figure tying it all together. The story collapses, and in its place is vast, open emptiness. This realization can feel like death, and in a way, it is. It's the death of the illusion that you were ever a separate, independent entity moving through the world. It's the end of the belief that you were the doer of actions, the thinker of thoughts, the chooser of choices. But the paradox is that this death is not a loss. It's a liberation, because when the self vanishes, what remains is not nothingness but everything. The boundaries that once confined you dissolve, and you begin to see that what you called me was never anything more than a temporary ripple in a limitless ocean. To understand this, consider a wave. For a brief moment, it rises from the sea, takes on a distinct shape, and moves across the surface. It appears separate, independent, alive, but it was never anything but water. Water before it rose, water while it moved, and water when it fell. The wave's identity was always an illusion created by perspective. The same is true of you. The sense of being a separate self, an I distinct from everything else, is just a temporary distortion in the continuous flow of reality. The vanishing point also reveals something else. The futility of striving to become anything. All our efforts to improve, to awaken, to find ourselves are based on the assumption that there's someone doing the becoming. But when that someone dissolves, the entire framework of striving collapses with it. There's nothing to achieve, nothing to become, nothing to perfect. Life is already complete. Reality is already whole. The only thing missing was your recognition of it. And yet, this realization does not lead to passivity. It doesn't mean you sit in silence doing nothing. Life continues. Thoughts arise, actions unfold, choices happen, but they do so without a center. There's no I behind them pushing the buttons. They simply happen, spontaneously and naturally, like rain falling or rivers flowing, and without the constant burden of maintaining a self. They happen with greater ease, clarity, and compassion. This dissolution also transforms your relationship with suffering. Much of human pain is tied to the sense of self, the one who is hurt, the one who is lacking, the one who must control or fix the world. When that self vanishes, suffering loses its anchor. Pain may still arise, but it no longer belongs to anyone. It is no longer personal. It passes through like weather, felt, but not clung to. Even death, which once loomed as the ultimate threat, changes meaning at the vanishing point. If there is no fixed self now, there is nothing that can truly die later. What you are, the vast, boundless reality beneath the illusion, is not born and cannot end. The disappearance of the I is not the end of you. It's the end of mistaking a temporary ripple for the ocean itself. Standing at the vanishing point is both the simplest and the hardest thing. Simple, because nothing needs to be done. The self dissolves naturally when you stop feeding it with belief. Hard, because every instinct pulls you back towards something to hold on to. But if you can resist the urge to grasp, if you can let go even of the idea of letting go, the illusion falls away on its own. And when it does, you see that the horizon you've been chasing was never out there. It was always here, in the quiet space where everything meets and nothing remains. In the end, the vanishing point is not a destination, but a revelation. It shows you that the seeker and the sought were never separate. It shows you that what you've been searching for was never lost. And it shows you that the one who thought it needed to be found was never real. When all lines converge and the illusion collapses, there is only this, vast, borderless, eternal. And in that endless expanse, the question, who am I, dissolves forever. From the beginning, everything in life seems to point toward a single, unquestioned truth, that there is a self at the center of it all. A self who thinks, who chooses, who remembers, who lives. We grow up speaking about it, protecting it, building it, celebrating it. We spend entire lifetimes searching for it, trying to understand who we are, where we belong, and what our purpose is. And yet, if you follow the trail of this self far enough, if you keep stripping away layers of belief and illusion, you arrive at a startling revelation. The self you've been seeking was never there. This realization doesn't come easily. It often arrives slowly, after years of questioning. At first it seems impossible. Of course I exist, you think. I feel, I choose, I act. But examine each of these claims closely, and they begin to dissolve. Feelings arise spontaneously. You don't choose them. Thoughts appear uninvited. You don't author them. Decisions emerge before you are even aware you've made them. Actions unfold from causes stretching back beyond memory. Where then is the I that is supposedly in control? Where is the thinker behind the thought, the chooser behind the choice? It's not that these things don't happen. They do. But they don't happen to anyone. They happen through you. Thoughts arise the way clouds form. Emotions pass the way weather changes. Choices unfold, like ripples in a current. The illusion is not in their existence, but in the belief that there is an owner behind them, a solid self pulling the strings. That belief is so deeply ingrained that we never stop to question it. And yet, the more we search for this self, the less we find. Try it now. Look inward, and attempt to locate the self. Is it in the body? But the body is constantly changing. Cells die and regenerate. Form shifts. Sensations come and go. Is it in the mind? But the mind is a ceaseless flow. Thoughts rise and vanish. Moods shift. Memories distort. Is it in consciousness itself? But consciousness, too, is not a fixed entity. It is a field of ever-changing experience. No matter where you look, there is no solid I to be found. There is experience, yes, but no experiencer. This absence is deeply unsettling at first because the self feels so real. It's been the reference point for everything, your desires, fears, ambitions, relationships. To question its existence is to question the ground beneath your feet. But the more you look, the clearer it becomes. The self is not a thing. It's a story. It's a narrative constructed by memory, language, and habit. A convenient fiction that organizes experience, but has no independent reality. Consider how identity shifts depending on context. You're one person with your parents, another with your friends, another still when you're alone. Your personality changes over time. Your beliefs evolve. Your preferences fluctuate. If the self were something solid and enduring, none of this would happen. But the self bends and reshapes itself endlessly, adapting to circumstance. It is less a fixed entity and more a performance, a mask worn by something deeper, something nameless. And yet the fact that the self is an illusion doesn't make it useless. It serves a purpose. It helps us navigate the world, form relationships, and construct meaning. It's a map, but it's not the territory. The mistake is confusing the two. The danger lies in believing the story is real, in clinging to the idea that there is a separate me who must be defended, improved, and preserved. That belief is the root of most human suffering. The fear of loss, the anxiety of failure, the dread of death. All of it arises from the assumption that there is something that can be lost, fail, or die. When the illusion falls away, those fears begin to dissolve too. Without a separate self, there's no one to be insulted, no one to be inadequate, no one to die. Life continues. Thoughts still arise, actions still happen, love and grief still move through you, but they no longer orbit around an imagined center. They happen freely, without clinging or resistance. The world doesn't stop, it simply unfolds. This understanding also transforms relationships. If there's no separate self inside you, there's none inside anyone else either. The boundaries between me and you become porous, even meaningless. Compassion deepens, because the suffering of others is no longer separate from your own. Love expands because it is no longer bound by the need to protect or possess. In the absence of a self, connection becomes not something you do, but something that is. The most remarkable part of this realization is that it's not new. It's not something you gain or achieve. It's something that was always true, simply obscured by misunderstanding. Like waking from a dream, you realize the self was never there, and yet everything you thought depended on it is still here. Life goes on, but now it does so without a center, without a controller, without an I. And this is the final irony. In the absence of the self, you discover what you truly are. Not a person, not a story, not a fragile identity clinging to permanence, but the vast, unbounded reality in which all those things appear and disappear. You were never the actor, the thinker, or the doer. You were the stage upon which the entire play unfolded. And once you see that clearly, the search ends, because the one who was searching was never real to begin with. There is a strange and delicate moment at the very edge of selfhood, a liminal space so subtle that most people pass right through it without noticing. It's the point where identity, memory, language, and even awareness have all loosened their grip, yet existence still holds on by the faintest thread. It is the moment before nothing, a threshold where being is on the verge of disappearing but hasn't quite crossed over, and in that breathless pause, reality reveals something that can't be seen from anywhere else. The truth that even nothingness is not as empty as it seems. To reach this moment, the mind must first shed nearly everything it clings to, the stories that once defined you, who you were, what you believed, what you desired, all fall away. The boundaries between self and world dissolve. Even the observer, that final witness that insists on being present for every experience, begins to fade into the background. What remains is a thin, trembling awareness hovering over the abyss, a wordless sense that something still is, even though there is almost nothing left to name it. This stage is unsettling, because it defies the mind's deepest assumptions. We've been taught to believe that the opposite of something is nothing, that existence and non-existence are cleanly separated. But here, at the threshold, you discover that the two are intertwined. The moment before nothing is not absence. It is fullness stripped of form, potential without identity. It's like the silence between heartbeats, empty, yet containing the entire rhythm of life within it. Philosophers and mystics have tried to describe this state for centuries. Some call it the void, others, the ground of being. But all descriptions fall short because language itself cannot enter here. Language is built on distinctions, this versus that, presence versus absence, and in this space, those distinctions no longer apply. The mind tries to categorize it, but there is nothing to hold on to. It tries to name it, but every name dissolves into silence. All that remains is an ungraspable awareness that even nothing is not truly nothing. One way to glimpse this state is to pay close attention to the moment between thoughts. Most of the time we're so caught up in the stream of thinking that we don't notice the gaps. But if you look carefully, you'll find tiny pauses, brief, unmeasured spaces where no thought arises, and yet consciousness hasn't disappeared. Those gaps are microcosms of the moment before nothing. They are the empty intervals where the self briefly ceases to exist, but reality continues undisturbed. Another glimpse appears in deep sleep, especially in the instant just before waking. There's a timeless, contentless state, not awareness as we normally think of it, but not unconsciousness either. It's a kind of fertile emptiness, a resting place where being is present without needing to be anything in particular. That's what the moment before nothing feels like, not oblivion, but possibility. This threshold also exposes the illusion of death as finality. We fear death because we equate it with absolute nothingness, a total erasure of being. But if the moment before nothing is any indication, nothing is not the end. It is not a black hole that swallows existence. It's more like a clearing, a return to the silent field from which everything arises. Just as a wave returning to the ocean does not cease to exist, but simply changes form, so too does the self dissolve into something larger, something that was always there before it appeared. The experience of this threshold also has profound implications for how we live. Most of our suffering is tied to our resistance to endings. The end of relationships, careers, identities, lives. We cling to form because we fear what lies beyond it. But when you see that the moment before nothing is not annihilation but completion, that it is the natural end point of all becoming, the fear begins to loosen. Endings stop feeling like losses and start to feel like returns. And perhaps the most beautiful lesson is this: the moment before nothing is not a destination to reach, but a truth that is always present. Every breath you take arises from it and returns to it. Every thought, every sensation, every experience emerges from this formless source and dissolves back into it. It's the canvas on which life paints itself, the silence that gives sound its meaning, the emptiness that allows form to exist at all. When you finally stop running from nothing, when you allow yourself to lean into that final trembling edge, you realize that you were never separate from it. You were never something that could be erased. You were the space in which everything comes and goes. And in that realization, the fear of nothingness evaporates, because nothingness was never opposed to you. It was you, all along. The journey to this point may feel like a dissolution, a slow stripping away of everything you believed you were. But what's revealed at the end is not destruction. It's the infinite stillness that was there before the first thought, before the first heartbeat, before the illusion of I ever arose. And when you stand there, balanced on the edge between being and nothing, you understand the ultimate paradox, that nothing is not the absence of everything, but the presence of what cannot be lost. Every life is a story. It has a beginning, a moment when the world first names you. It has a middle, the chapters filled with choices, relationships, mistakes, and triumphs. And it has an end, a final page where the narrative concludes. But stories are not reality. They are frameworks, ways of organizing the chaos of experience into something meaningful. And if you follow the path of identity all the way to its final destination, you eventually arrive at the point where even the story collapses, a place where nothing needs to be told, and nothing is left to explain. This is the moment when all stories end. From the very beginning, the self is a story. It's the tale you tell yourself about who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. It's built from memory and language, woven from cultural expectations, social feedback, and personal interpretation. Without this narrative, most people feel lost. We cling to the story because it gives shape to our existence, because it helps us make sense of the incomprehensible. But like all stories, it is not the thing itself. It's a map of the terrain, not the terrain. The problem arises when we forget that. Over time, the story becomes more than a tool. It becomes a prison. We define ourselves by it. I am a success. I am a failure. I am a parent, a teacher, a believer, a survivor. These labels become walls around our being. They limit who we think we are and who we believe we can become. They turn infinite possibility into a single narrow path, and the longer we live inside these stories, the harder it becomes to see that they are optional. But every story, even the most deeply held, is temporary. It changes with time, bends under new experiences, and eventually reaches its final sentence. The roles that once defined you will end. The names that once carried weight will be forgotten. Even the memories that once anchored your sense of self will fade. At first, this seems terrifying. If the story ends, does that mean you end with it? If the narrative disappears, what's left? The answer, paradoxically, is everything. Because the ending of the story is not the end of reality. It's the end of illusion. It's the moment when you stop confusing the narrative with the truth. And when that happens, something far more fundamental and far more real begins to emerge. Think of the silence that follows the final note of a song. The music stops, but the silence isn't empty. It's full of presence. The absence of melody makes you aware of something deeper. The stillness that was always there, waiting beneath the sound. The end of the story is like that. It's not a void. It's a clearing. It's the place where the noise of identity finally subsides, revealing the vastness that was there all along. This is why many spiritual traditions speak of liberation not as the attainment of something new, but as the end of something false. They describe enlightenment as the extinguishing of the story, the dissolution of the illusion that you are the hero, the narrator, or even the protagonist of your life. And in that dissolving, life does not vanish. It continues, but without the weight of a plot. It unfolds freely, spontaneously, without the need for a beginning, middle, or end. This perspective radically changes how you view suffering. Most of our pain is tied to our stories. The stories of injustice, failure, loss, or inadequacy. When the story collapses, those pains lose their framework. They may still arise, but they are no longer personal. They are no longer chapters in a narrative about me. They are simply experiences, fleeting, impersonal, and free of meaning beyond the moment. And without the story to sustain them, they pass more easily. It also transforms how we understand death. We fear death because we see it as the end of the story, the moment when the final page is turned and the book is closed. But if the story was never the real you to begin with, then its ending is not your ending. It's merely the conclusion of a particular narrative thread. What remains is the page itself, the space in which the story was written, and that page has no beginning and no end. When all stories end, something extraordinary becomes possible. Life without narrative. It is not a life devoid of meaning. In fact, it may be more meaningful than ever, but it is no longer shackled to explanation. Events happen without needing to fit into a plot. People come and go without needing roles. Experiences arise and pass without needing reasons. Life becomes what it always was, before the mind started telling stories about it. A continuous, boundless unfolding. And in that unfolding, you discover a truth that no story could ever capture, that you were never the protagonist, never the narrator, never even the author. You were the paper the story was written on. You were the silence between the words. You were the reality that allowed the story to exist in the first place. And once the story ends, that reality, infinite, timeless, unbound, remains. So when the narrative of me finally falls silent, don't mourn its passing, celebrate it. Because the ending of the story is not the end of you. It's the beginning of everything that was too vast, too real, and too boundless to ever fit into words. Language is the first tool we use to make sense of the world. It names things, divides them, orders them. It tells us what is here and what is not, what belongs and what doesn't. From the earliest moments of childhood, we learn to label everything we encounter. This is me, that is you, this is good, that is bad. And with each word, the world seems to make a little more sense. But beneath all those words, beneath all that naming, something vast and wordless is always waiting. Something that existed before language and remains after it. When all names fall away, when nothing needs to be called anything at all, reality reveals itself in a way that language could never capture. Names are powerful, but they are also traps. They give shape to the shapeless, but in doing so, they also limit it. To name a thing is to define it, to set boundaries around it, to separate it from everything else. When you name yourself, I am this, I am that. You draw lines around something that is by nature boundaryless. You carve a fixed identity out of something fluid, and over time, those names stop being descriptions and become prisons. Think about how easily a name becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I am a failure. I am strong. I am unworthy. These labels may have started as observations, but once they're spoken, once they're believed, they begin to shape behavior, perception, and even reality itself. The mind clings to them, builds stories around them, defends them, and in doing so, it forgets that they were never more than sounds, never more than symbols pointing towards something that refuses to be contained. Even the name I is just another label, a placeholder the mind uses to organize experience. Yet we treat it as sacred, as if it were the very essence of who we are. But what happens if we stop using that word? What if we strip language away and sit silently with what remains? What's left when you no longer call yourself me? When you no longer divide the world into this and that, when you stop trying to define what is happening and simply let it happen? At first, the mind resists. It wants to name everything, to sort and categorize and explain. Without words, it feels lost. But slowly, something shifts. The urge to define weakens, the compulsion to label fades, and in the absence of names, a new kind of clarity emerges, a direct, unmediated encounter with reality as it is, not as language says it should be. This is not a mystical fantasy. It's something you experience every day, often without noticing. When you are completely absorbed in music, you don't think, this is a melody. When you are lost in a sunset, you don't say, this is orange. In those moments, language falls away, and experience becomes pure. There's no separation between subject and object, no need for names or descriptions. There is only what is. This state reveals something profound, that names were never necessary for reality to exist. They were never the thing itself. They were tools, useful, perhaps, but never essential. The tree doesn't need to be called tree to grow. The sky doesn't need to be labeled blue to stretch across the horizon. And you don't need to be called you to exist. Reality doesn't care what you call it, it simply is. When you realize this, a subtle freedom emerges. You no longer have to define yourself to feel real. You no longer have to cling to labels to know who you are. You can stop saying I am this or I am that, and simply rest in I am, and eventually even that I becomes unnecessary. Being doesn't need a name. It doesn't need to be spoken to be true. This freedom extends beyond the self. It changes how you see everything around you. When nothing needs a name, the world loses its divisions. There's no longer me and you, inside and outside, life and death. There's just a seamless, continuous unfolding, a single, boundless reality playing out without beginning or end. The distinctions that once seemed so crucial now appear arbitrary, even irrelevant. What once felt like separate parts reveal themselves as different expressions of the same whole. This perspective also dissolves much of the suffering that language creates. So many of our struggles come from the stories we tell. Stories built from words, built from names. This is mine. That is theirs. This should not be. That must happen. But when nothing needs a name, those stories lose their grip. Suffering becomes sensation. Loss becomes change. Even death becomes transformation. Not an end, but a shift in the endless flow of what is. And perhaps most beautifully, this namelessness brings you closer to truth, because the truth cannot be spoken. The moment you try to describe it, you reduce it. The instant you name it, you separate it from itself. Truth is not in the word life, it is life. It's not in the concept of being, it is being. And when you stop insisting that everything have a name, you begin to experience that truth directly, without the filter of language. In the end, the point is not to reject language. Words are useful, even beautiful. They help us share, connect, and create. But they are not reality itself. They are only shadows of it, echoes pointing back to something larger, deeper, beyond all definition. And when you finally let go of the need to name everything, you discover that reality never needed your words in the first place. It was whole all along. When nothing needs a name, the world doesn't shrink. It expands. It becomes limitless. And in that limitless expanse, you discover that what you truly are has never been a word, a thought, or a label. It has always been the nameless presence beneath them, silent, infinite, and free. What happens when identity, not just the stories you tell about yourself, not just the roles you play or the names you answer to, but identity itself, stops existing? At first, the very question feels absurd. Identity is so deeply woven into experience that imagining life without it seems impossible. Who would be left to think, to feel, to live? And yet, if you follow the path we've traced, through memory and awareness, through story and self-concept, beyond language, and even beyond recognition, you eventually arrive at a place where identity doesn't just dissolve, it becomes irrelevant. It no longer has a reason to exist. But identity is not necessary for life to unfold. It's a tool, a convenient fiction, that helps consciousness navigate complexity, and like any tool, it has a purpose and a limit. Once that purpose is fulfilled, it can be set down. The breath doesn't stop when identity stops. The body doesn't forget how to heal or grow. The sun still rises, rivers still flow, and thoughts still arise. What ceases is the illusion that all of this is happening to someone. To understand this, it's important to see how identity forms in the first place. It isn't something you were born with. It was constructed, piece by piece, word by word, as the mind learned to label and categorize experience. This is me. That is not. Over time, those distinctions grew thicker, and the illusion of a fixed, separate self emerged. Identity became the central reference point for everything. All thoughts, actions, and perceptions were organized around it. Life became a story about someone, a character with a name and a past, a future and a fate. This is not annihilation. It's not the disappearance of existence, but the disappearance of ownership. It's not that you are gone, it's that the idea of you as something separate and enduring was never real to begin with. It was a conceptual overlay, a filter through which reality was interpreted. And once that filter drops away, what's revealed is something astonishingly simple. Reality doesn't need a self to be real. Existence doesn't require an identity to exist. This realization often arrives, not as a sudden flash, but as a gradual loosening. The grip of I weakens. The need to defend, justify, or maintain a self-image fades. The stories about who you are begin to feel less compelling, less important. You might still use them. They remain practical for navigating the world, but you no longer believe in them with the same intensity. They're not you anymore. They're just temporary expressions, like clouds passing through an endless sky. When identity stops existing, life doesn't end. What ends is the division between me and everything else. The world is no longer arranged around a central figure. Experience simply happens, raw, immediate, and unfiltered. The wind blows, but there's no I who feels it. A thought appears, but there's no thinker claiming it. Laughter bursts forth, but there's no one laughing. There is sound, sensation, perception, but no owner of them. Life continues, but it no longer belongs to anyone. The implications of this are profound. Fear loses its foundation because there's no me to protect. Desire softens because there's no I to fulfill. Even suffering changes. Pain still arises. Life doesn't become a perpetual state of bliss, but it's no longer personal. It's just part of the flow, like rain falling or wind blowing. And because it's not yours, it passes more easily, leaving less residue behind. And then, one day, something subtle shifts. You look for the you at the center of experience, and there's nothing there. Not an absence, not a void, but a kind of spaciousness that was always present, just hidden beneath the noise. It's the same awareness that was there when you were a child, the same presence that's witnessed every moment of your life. But now, it's free from the burden of a name. It doesn't need to be someone, it simply is. This state has been described in many ways: enlightenment, awakening, liberation. But those words often obscure more than they reveal. They make it sound rare or distant, as though it were a prize to be achieved. In truth, it's the most ordinary thing in the world. It's what's left when all the extra layers fall away. It's the natural state of being, the one that existed before identity was built, and the one that remains when identity dissolves. And perhaps most surprising of all, life becomes more vibrant. Freed from the constant commentary of I, each moment becomes immediate, intimate, alive. Colors seem brighter, sounds feel deeper. Every breath carries the weight of eternity. There's no distance between you and the world, because there is no you and no world, only the seamless unfolding of what is. When identity stops existing, you don't become nothing, you become everything. The boundaries dissolve, the walls collapse, and what's left is the vast, infinite field in which all experience arises and falls. It's not an achievement or an escape, it's a homecoming, a return to what you always were before the story began. Relationships transform too. Without a self to defend, walls fall away. Compassion deepens. Not because you try harder, but because the illusion of separation dissolves. The suffering of others is no longer theirs. It's just suffering. The joy of others is no longer theirs. It's just joy. Love becomes less about possession, and more about recognition. a recognition of the shared reality that underlies all forms. When identity stops existing, reality doesn't disappear. It becomes more real than ever. What you truly are was never the name, the story, or the character. It was never the thoughts, the choices, or the observer. It was the open, limitless space in which all of that appeared. And it is still here, silently holding everything, unchanged, unbroken, and free.